What if the greatest mystery in the history of business wasn't how to sell during an economic boom, but why a tiny fraction of salespeople were quietly crushing their numbers and bringing in massive deals during the absolute worst economic collapse in decades?
I mean, it sounds like an impossible paradox, right?
Yeah.
What we're talking about, record-breaking success in a fundamentally broken economy. It completely defies the conventional wisdom of how markets are actually supposed to work.
Yeah, let's paint the picture for a second. Think back to early 2009.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The bottom has completely fallen out of the global economy. Credit vanishes overnight. Commerce essentially just stops.
Yeah.
If you're in business-to-business sales B2B, it is an absolute nightmare.
Total nightmare.
Imagine being a head of sales, having to get up every single morning, rally your troops, and send them into a battle that they cannot possibly win. You're asking them to find business where literally no business can be found.
Yeah.
And yet, sitting right there in the data is this statistical anomaly. A small, uniquely gifted group of reps were still selling. And not just scraping by, they were bringing in the kind of business that most reps could only dream of during a roaring bull market.
It was a terrifying time for commercial leaders, honestly. And that terror is what makes this anomaly so, vital to understand.
Mhm.
Because selling is always a tough fight. But it's one thing to sell to reluctant or nervous customers.
Sure.
It is a completely different universe to try and sell to no one at all, which is exactly what 2009 felt like.
Right, because corporate budgets weren't just reduced, they were frozen entirely.
Exactly. Decisions were deferred indefinitely. Survival was the only metric companies actually cared about. So when executives looked at their dashboards and saw this tiny percentage of their workforce not just surviving but thriving, it sparked a desperate, urgent question.
Were they just lucky? Or, I don't know, did they possess some kind of innate charisma that allowed them to hypnotize panicked buyers?
Yeah, and for the leaders staring down bankruptcy, their very survival depended on figuring out if this magic could be, well, captured, bottled, and exported to the rest of the struggling sales force.
And that desperation is what triggered one of the most exhaustive studies of commercial behavior ever conducted. The Sales Executive Council, or SEC, stepped in.
Yeah, they didn't just run a quick survey. They launched a massive, intensive investigation. We're talking about data spanning dozens of global companies, analyzing thousands of sales reps all over the world.
Every major industry, every geography.
Right, and every go-to-market model. They really needed to decode the DNA of this special group of winners.
So in this deep dive, we are unpacking the introduction and Chapter 1 of the deeply influential findings from that study captured in the book, The Challenger Sale. We're mapping a massive tectonic shift in the business world. The move from traditional product selling to what's known as complex solution selling. Over the course of this conversation, you're going to learn why the modern buying process has become so completely miserable for your customers and why understanding this shift is an absolute survival requirement.
Yeah, and whether you're interested in business, entrepreneurship, or frankly just getting someone to say yes to a complex idea, you need to understand the underlying physics of this environment.
Exactly. The lessons we're going to explore extend far beyond people who have, sales printed on their business card.
Oh, totally. If you're an engineer trying to convince a leadership team to adopt a new technical workflow, or a founder pitching a startup idea to a skeptical investor,
Or even trying to negotiate a complex agreement in your personal life.
right, you're operating in the exact environment we're about to decode. The mechanics of persuasion have fundamentally changed.
So let's dig into how the SEC actually decoded those mechanics. You mentioned they analyzed thousands of reps. How do you even go about measuring something as subjective as human interaction across that kind of scale? I mean, a sales conversation in Tokyo about heavy machinery looks very different from a software pitch in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, that is the exact hurdle the researchers had to overcome. To strip away the subjective elements, the cultural differences, the industry jargon, the specific products, they used a method called complex statistical factor analysis.
Okay, so what does that actually look like?
Well, rather than asking managers who their best people were, which is, highly subjective, they tested the reps against dozens of specific attributes. They measured behaviors, attitudes, and activities.
Like what?
Like, how frequently do they call? What specific types of questions do they ask? How do they handle price objections? How do they interact with their own internal management?
So they're throwing all these granular behavioral data points into a massive statistical blender to see what patterns emerge.
Essentially, yes. Factor analysis groups variables that fluctuate together. So, If a rep who frequently challenges a customer's assumptions also tends to prepare very specific types of financial models, the analysis groups those traits together.
Got it.
And when the dust settled on all this global data, the results were stunning. They discovered that just about every B2B sales rep in the world falls into one of 5 distinct profiles.
It's like discovering there are only 5 distinct majors in the University of Sales. Everyone has a dominant style.
Exactly. And the profiles aren't a rigid personality test like Myers-Briggs or something. They're better understood as a specific set of skills and behaviors that define a person's primary mode of interacting with customers. Every rep leans heavily on one of these 5 behavioral toolkits when the pressure is on.
Which is fascinating on its own. But the second insight from the data is the one that causes panic in boardrooms. When they laid those 5 profiles over actual sales performance, they didn't see an even distribution.
Not at all. They found one clear winner and one spectacular loser. Yeah, one profile dramatically outperformed the rest across the board, while another fell dangerously behind. But the deeply troubling part for most sales leaders was that they had been betting their entire companies on the loser.
Wait, really?
Yes, they were hiring, training, promoting, and praising the specific behavioral profile that was statistically least likely to win in a complex environment.
Okay, we are definitely going to tease the exact identities of those winners and losers for our next deep dive because the tension there is just incredible. But today, we need to focus on the third insight. This is the explosive realization that completely flipped the script on the entire study.
Right. The researchers went into this looking for a very specific answer, and the data told them they were asking the wrong question entirely.
Because they initiated the massive study to find the winning recipe for a down economy.
Exactly. They wanted to know how these star reps were beating the 2009 recession. But when they cross-referenced the performance data with historical trends, the data proved the economy was actually a red herring.
A red herring?
Yeah. The profile most likely to win wasn't winning because of the down economy. They were winning irrespective of it. The gap between the winners and everyone else didn't suddenly appear in 2009. It had been widening for years.
Okay, let me make sure we're grounding this properly for everyone listening. It's like studying a group of sailors who perfectly navigate a deadly historic hurricane. You sit on the shore, watch them glide through 50-foot waves, and think, wow, they have some kind of anti-hurricane magic.
Right.
They know exactly how to beat a storm. But when you look closer, when you really analyze the mechanics of their maneuvers, you realize they aren't fighting the weather at all. They just understand the fundamental deep ocean currents that everyone else is ignoring.
That's a perfect analogy.
They're hurricane experts. They are master navigators, which means, critically, they will sail significantly faster than you on sunny, calm days, too.
Exactly. The downturn merely exacerbated a widening gap that was already there. It acted as a magnifying glass.
Oh, I see.
When budgets are overflowing during a boom, an average rep can mask their inefficiencies. There's enough loose capital floating around that even clumsy sales methods yield results.
Sure, everybody's buying.
Right. But when that loose capital evaporated overnight, the underlying flaws in how most people were selling were exposed. The strategies these top performers were using aren't just survival tactics for a recession. They are the essential skills required to drive commercial success across the foreseeable future, regardless of whether the stock market is crashing or peaking.
So if you're listening to this and wondering why your last big pitch got stalled or why a client went cold after seemingly loving your presentation, this is your first major takeaway. We have to stop blaming macroeconomic conditions for stalled deals or rejected pitches.
It's so tempting, though.
It is. It is so tempting to say, well, interest rates are up or, the industry is just going through a tightening phase right now. That might be true, but it's not the reason you lost the deal. If you are struggling to get a yes, it's highly likely your approach hasn't adapted to the underlying complexity of what you are actually trying to sell.
Yeah, blaming the economy is a comfortable trap because it absolves us of responsibility. If it's the market's fault, you don't have to change your behavior. You just have to wait it out.
Right.
But the data unequivocally tells us that waiting it out is a death sentence. Success is entirely possible in those hostile conditions if your model of persuasion aligns with the reality of the buyer's environment.
Wait, I have to push back here. You're saying the 2009 economy was just a red herring, a magnifying glass. But 2009 destroyed century-old companies. It reshaped global finance. How can you say the economy didn't matter?
Well,
If the economy wasn't the actual current that shifted underneath everyone's feet, what was? What changed in the years prior to 2009 that made selling so incredibly complex that only these master navigators could survive?
To answer that, we have to trace the evolution of the sales model itself. Specifically, the massive corporate shift towards something called solution selling.
Okay.
And to understand why this shift happened, you have to look at the terrifying economic trend that suppliers faced throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, which is relentless commoditization.
Break down the mechanics of that commoditization. Why was it so terrifying?
Imagine you invest millions of dollars in research and development to create a highly innovative piece of technology. Say, a state-of-the-art server for corporate networks.
Okay.
For the first year, you're the only one who has it. You can charge a premium price, and your sales reps just have to show up and explain what the product does.
Sounds easy enough.
But modern globalization and rapid technological advancement mean that within 18 months, a competitor overseas has reverse engineered your server. They figure out how to manufacture an almost identical product with 95% of the same features for half the price. So your unique innovation becomes a standardized commodity. You are no longer competing on value. You are forced into a race to the bottom purely on price per unit.
Exactly. And a race to the bottom on price destroys profit margins.
Yeah.
For a business, it is a slow bleed to death. You cannot sustain innovation or growth if your margins are constantly shrinking.
Right.
So to escape this commoditization trap and protect their premium pricing, major companies realized they had to change what they were selling. They stopped selling individual standalone products. Instead, they shifted to broad-based consultative sales of bundles.
Bundles.
Yeah, they bundled their physical products, software, implementation services, and ongoing consulting into one massive package. They stopped selling products and started selling solutions.
I see this everywhere now. Nobody just sells software anymore. It's an integrated digital transformation solution. You don't buy a commercial tractor. You invest in an agricultural yield optimization system.
Right. The jargon gets a bit much, but the corporate logic behind the shift is entirely sound.
Well, if a competitor wants to beat you in a commodity market, they just have to copy your widget. But if you're selling a complex, interwoven bundle of unique capabilities tailored to a client-specific business process, it is exponentially harder for a competitor to replicate that. It creates a moat around your margins.
I see.
According to the SEC's survey, this pivot has been almost universal. Fully 75% of companies reported that their primary strategic aspiration is to be a solutions provider to a majority of their customers.
75% is a staggering majority. So basically, the entire B2B world is trying to run this exact play to protect their profits.
Pretty much.
But if the logic is sound and it successfully protects margins from commoditization, why are you calling it a trap? You suggested earlier that this shift to solution selling is actually what made the environment so hostile. Are you suggesting suppliers should have just kept selling cheap, single products and gone bankrupt? What was the alternative?
Well, they had to make the shift to survive, absolutely. But they completely underestimated the psychological and operational toll that solutions place on the buyer.
Okay, the toll on the buyer.
Yes. The trap lies in the sheer burden of the process. By definition, if you promise a customer that you are going to provide a solution, they naturally expect you to actually solve a deeply embedded business problem, not just drop off a reliable piece of hardware.
Right. You can't just hand them a box, shake their hand, and say, good luck, read the manual. You are suddenly on the hook for their operational success.
Exactly. And to deliver on that promise, the supplier has to understand the customer's underlying problems as well as, if not better than the customer does.
Wow.
The sales rep has to map out the client's internal workflows, identify points of friction, articulate the specific financial benefits of changing those workflows, and determine the exact metrics that will measure success. So, how does a traditional sales rep go about gathering all of that incredibly dense proprietary information?
By interrogating the customer. They ask a mountain of questions.
Yep.
I mean, I've been on the receiving end of this. It's the classic painful discovery meeting. A rep sits down across from you with a notepad and asks, so what's keeping you up at night? Or, what are your key strategic priorities for Q3?
Exactly. And the rep thinks they're being highly consultative. They spend hours trying to discover the customer's needs. But pivot your perspective and think about what this looks like from the buyer side of the table.
It's exhausting.
It devolves into a protracted, agonizing ping-pong match. The customer has to spend hours educating the rep, explaining the nuances of their highly complex business. The rep goes away, translates those notes, comes back a week later, and summarizes their understanding.
And then the customer has to correct the misunderstanding.
Great.
And it doesn't stop there. Then the rep goes back to their own company, fights with their engineers to create a massive 100-page proposal, and brings it back. The customer has to review this massive document, find the flaws, amend it, and send it back again.
Let me give you an analogy. Imagine going to a doctor because you feel terrible. You sit on the exam table and the doctor walks in with a blank notepad and says, tell me exactly how your cellular biology is failing right now.
Oh my gosh.
I need you to summarize all your symptoms chronologically, propose a few chemical compounds you think might alleviate the issue, and then we'll negotiate a treatment plan over the next 3 weeks.
I would literally walk out of the clinic.
Exactly.
And to make it worse, the doctor is essentially charging you for the privilege of explaining your own biology to them.
Yeah.
If you are a business owner sitting through a 2-hour discovery call where you do all the talking, you're essentially doing the sales rep's job for them. You're providing free consulting for the person who is trying to sell you something.
Yes.
You went to the doctor so they could diagnose you based on their expertise and bring the solution to you.
And that is the exact frustration boiling over in the B2B world. The research formally labels this phenomenon solutions fatigue. The dance of the complex sale requires a massive amount of customer involvement across a wide range of stakeholders.
I can imagine.
We're talking about countless conference calls, internal alignment meetings, and endless slide decks. And from the customer's point of view, 100% of this heavy lifting is required early in the process, well before they ever see a single drop of actual value from the supplier. It's an enormous act of faith on their part, and frankly, it is exhausting.
Have you ever sat in a pitch meeting where the potential client seemed interested at first, but over the course of 3 or 4 follow-up calls, they just slowly faded away and stopped returning emails?
It all happens all the time.
They didn't go to a competitor. They just ghosted you. This is why. You aren't just fighting another vendor. You are fighting the buyer's internal solutions fatigue. You're making it too painful and too laborious to buy from you.
Which brings us to a critical inflection point in the timeline. Customers are smart. Executives don't get to the C-suite by being passive victims of inefficient processes. If suppliers are going to demand this massive, exhausting, front-loaded effort just to figure out what a solution might look like, how do you think buyers are going to respond?
They're going to build defenses. If every sales rep is demanding hours of their time to play 20 questions, buyers are going to change the rules of engagement to protect their time and their jobs.
And that is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Every action by the supplier generated an equal and opposite reaction from the buyer. Because of solutions fatigue and the high stakes of these complex bundles, customers aggressively rewrote the purchasing playbook.
Wow.
The researchers identified 4 specific structural counter moves that modern customers use to insulate themselves from the burden and risk of complex solutions. This isn't just theory, this is the physics of sales in the modern era.
Okay, let's unpack these 4 defensive maneuvers because this is the gauntlet every modern professional has to run through. If buyers are exhausted and feeling exposed, what is the first mechanism they use to protect themselves?
The first major trend is the rise of the consensus-based sale. Let's look at the psychology of a buyer in a solutions environment. You're no longer asking them to buy a $5,000 piece of hardware out of their discretionary budget.
Right.
You're asking them to buy a $500,000 integrated system that requires changing how their entire department works. The payoff of that solution is highly uncertain, but the cost, both financial and political, is massive. Because of that, individual executives are simply refusing to take the risk alone.
There used to be an old saying in enterprise tech, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. The idea was that if you chose the safe, established vendor, your job was secure, even if the project failed. But in the modern solutions era, it sounds like the new mantra is, no one ever gets fired if literally the entire executive team agreed to the purchase.
That's exactly it. The imperative is risk distribution. If an IT director buys a massive software solution and it fails, and she was the only one championing it, she loses her job.
Right.
But if she gets the chief financial officer, the chief marketing officer, and the head of human resources to all sign off on it, The failure becomes a collective organizational learning experience rather than an individual firing offense.
That's clever.
The SEC data shows that widespread support across a team is now the #1 thing senior decision makers look for when evaluating a purchase. They want consensus before they commit a dime.
But let's think about what this does to the mathematical probability of making a sale. In the old days, a charismatic rep could charm the IT director over a nice steak dinner, prove the product worked, and close the deal. Now, that same rep has to track down the IT director, the CFO, the CMO, the head of HR, and probably a legal representative. If you need 5 distinct people with 5 completely different sets of priorities to all agree to spend money, well, the chance of getting a no skyrockets. Any single one of them can veto the project and derail the whole thing.
Yes. It exponentially increases the complexity, the length, and the fragility of the sales cycle. The rep isn't just selling a product anymore. They have to act as an internal political diplomat for the buyer's organization. That is countermove #1, consensus.
Okay, so if buyers are building consensus to distribute the political risk, it stands to reason they are also looking for ways to mitigate the financial risk, which leads to the second countermove. What happens when the committee finally agrees they want to move forward?
Even with consensus, the anxiety remains high. So countermove #2 is increased risk aversion directed at the supplier. As the deals get larger and more complex, customers are demanding that the suppliers actually share the burden of failure. They are changing how success is measured.
How does that mechanical shift play out in a contract negotiation? Like, what does that look like?
Historically, success in a B2B transaction was measured by product delivery. The contract said, did the supplier deliver and install the servers by October 1st? Yes. The terms are fulfilled. Pay the invoice. It was transactional.
Right.
Today, because suppliers are pitching solutions that promise to fix business problems, the buyers are holding them to that exact promise. Success is no longer measured by whether the software was installed. It is measured by whether the customer's actual business metrics improve as a result.
Wow. So the CFO looks at the rep and says, you promised this digital transformation solution would make our logistics network more efficient. We will pay you 70% upfront, and we will only release the final 30% of your invoice if our overhead costs verifiably drop by 15% next quarter.
Exactly.
And if they don't, you don't get the rest of the money.
Spot on. Suppliers are being forced to run right at risk and build it directly into their value proposition. Customers are no longer willing to accept on faith that a complex bundle will deliver value. They demand skin in the game.
That makes sense.
If you're going to call yourself a partner rather than a vendor, you have to share the financial risk of partnership.
That is terrifying if your company hasn't actually validated the ROI of what you're selling.
Yeah.
You could do all the work perfectly and still not get paid because the client failed to utilize the tool properly.
Yep.
Okay, so the buyer has built a consensus committee to protect their jobs, and they're demanding shared risk to protect their budgets. What is the third defensive maneuver?
The third trend is an inevitable reaction to the concept of a solution itself. Greater demand for customization. Think about the messaging suppliers use. They promise a highly customized, tailored solution designed to perfectly fit the client's unique operational challenges. Naturally, the customer takes them at their word and expects heavy, granular customization. They want the software to integrate perfectly with their legacy systems, they want custom dashboards for different departments, and they want tailored reporting structures.
That seems fair. I mean, if you tell me you're a custom tailor, I expect the suit to fit perfectly. Where is the friction?
The friction, or really the brutal paradox, is that while buyers demand intense customization, they violently refuse to pay a premium for it.
Oh.
Like, you told me it was a tailored solution, so tailor it. Why are you trying to charge me at a 20% markup for the tailoring you promised in the brochure?
Exactly. The logic is airtight from the buyer's side. If a bundle doesn't do exactly what they uniquely need it to do, it isn't a solution. It's just a generic product, so they won't pay extra to make it functional.
But from the supplier side, this destroys the entire economic model. The whole reason they bundled products together was to achieve economies of scale and protect profit margins. Customizing every single deployment requires massive engineering and consulting hours, which eats the margin alive. Everyone demands bespoke customization. No one is willing to fund it.
So the supplier's getting squeezed by a hydra-headed consensus committee, squeezed by shared risk contracts, and squeezed by demands for free customization. It sounds like an unwinnable war of attrition. What could possibly be the fourth and final nail in the coffin?
The fourth trend is arguably the most hostile, and it emerged because the sheer complexity of the modern business environment outpaced the buyer's ability to evaluate it: the rise of third-party consultants.
Oh boy.
Over the last decade, executive teams realized that the solutions being pitched to them, cloud infrastructure overhauls, enterprise resource planning systems, massive logistical shifts, are so deeply technical and complex that they aren't even qualified to evaluate if they're getting a good deal.
It makes sense. A chief marketing officer isn't a software engineer. They know they need a new platform, but they have no idea if the architecture the supplier is pitching is actually state-of-the-art or just smoke and mirrors. So they bring in backup.
Right. They hire supposedly neutral third-party experts to sit at the table and help them navigate the purchase. On the surface, this sounds like hiring a structural engineer to inspect a house before you buy it. Prudent, right?
Definitely.
But in the corporate world, there's a vicious twist. These consultants are highly expensive. To justify their massive fees to the executive team that hired them, they have to prove they are saving the company money.
Oh, I see where this goes. The only way the consultant proves their worth is by attacking the supplier's proposal.
Precisely. Their literal job is to ruthlessly extract their pound of flesh from the supplier's profit margins. They audit the supplier's past deals, demand access to pricing models, insist on aggressive discounts, and work actively to commoditize the very solutions the supplier spent years trying to differentiate.
Brutal.
They look at a highly nuanced solution bundle and say, well, actually, vendor B offers these 3 components for 15% less, so we demand a price match. They strip away the solution value and force the conversation back down to price.
Let's put this all together into a comprehensive real-world scenario so we can truly feel the sheer weight of what a modern professional is up against.
Sure.
Let's say you're a top-tier rep trying to sell a new enterprise-wide workflow software. If we rewind the clock 15 years, you would have a great meeting with the IT director. You show her the software, she sees it's better than what they have, you negotiate a slight discount, shake hands, and the deal is done in a month. It's clean, fast, and transactional.
Both sides are happy, the supplier gets their margin, the buyer gets their tool.
But fast forward to today. You have that same great meeting with the IT director. She loves the software, but she says, this is a big operational shift. I need consensus. So you spend the next 3 months tracking down the CMO, the CFO, and the head of HR. You finally get them all in a room. The CFO leans forward and says, we are highly risk-averse right now. We will only sign this contract if you guarantee 20% of your fee is contingent on our overhead dropping next year. You swallow hard, but you agree.
You've survived 2 of the traps.
Then the CMO chimes in. Also, our marketing team uses a completely different legacy database. We need you to build a highly customized API bridge specifically for us. But since this is an enterprise solution, we expect that integration to be included at no additional cost. Now, your engineering costs just spiked, eating your margin.
Ouch.
And just when you think you can somehow make the math work to get the logo, a hired gun, third-party auditor sitting quietly at the end of the table clears his throat and says, based on my industry analysis of similar deployments, your licensing fees are out of market. We demand an immediate 20% discount on the entire package.
And there's the reality of the trap. In that environment, you can very easily win the business but lose all the money. You win the contract, your company gets the logo on your website, but the deal is completely unprofitable because the margin was bled dry by shared risk, free customization, and consultant-enforced discounts.
If you are an entrepreneur or anyone who relies on pitching ideas, this is the most sobering reality check. You cannot rely on a charismatic presentation to a single decision maker anymore. Those days are dead and buried.
Completely dead.
If you're selling a complex idea, product, or service, you must build strategies that appeal to deeply divided committees. You have to anticipate demands for free customization, and you have to go into the room fully armed with data to defend your margins against professional, ruthless negotiators whose bonus is tied to shrinking your paycheck.
Which perfectly closes the loop on the original mystery of 2009. Think back to the SEC researchers staring at the data. The economic crash of 2009 didn't cause this hostile buying environment. The industry-wide shift to solution selling over the previous decade caused it.
That makes so much sense now.
The economy just acted like a massive stress test, breaking the systems that were already fundamentally fragile.
I have to be completely honest. Hearing all of this laid out, the consensus committees, the risk aversion, the customization traps, the hired mercenaries, if the buying process has become this guarded and structurally hostile, how does any normal person survive? Does this mean that an average, hardworking professional is just fundamentally doomed in the modern market?
That is exactly the question the SEC data answers, and I will warn you, the math is staggering.
Okay, lay it on me.
This new complex landscape has had a profound impact on individual human performance. It has triggered a phenomenon the researchers call the widening talent gap.
Let's really ground this math. When you say a talent gap, what does the disparity actually look like between an average worker and a top performer?
To understand the impact of the environment, the researchers separated the sales reps into two groups. Core performers, which represent the massive middle of the pack, the solid, average, reliable reps who make up the bulk of any workforce. And star performers, the top 20%. First, they looked at companies that were still running a traditional transactional selling model, selling single products like boxes of paper or basic software licenses. In that simple environment, star performers outsell core performers by 59%.
A 59% gap makes intuitive sense. The star is about 1.5 times better than the average person on the floor. Maybe they hustle a bit more, they make a few extra calls, or they just have a slightly more polished pitch. It's a noticeable gap, but it's manageable. You could build a company around that distribution.
Exactly. But then the researchers filtered the data to look exclusively at companies running a complex solution selling model.
And what happened?
In that high-stakes, hostile environment, star performers don't just beat core performers by 59%. They outsell them by nearly 200%.
Wait, the gap goes from 59% to almost 200%?
Yeah.
It nearly quadruples just because the product became more complex.
It quadruples, and the reason why is rooted in cognitive load. A transactional sale just requires high volume and basic product knowledge. A core rep can succeed through sheer repetition. But a complex solution sale requires deep business acumen, intense cognitive flexibility, the ability to manage group politics, and the courage to debate with a CFO. Average reps simply do not possess those specialized skills, so when faced with the 4 countermoves we just discussed, they completely freeze.
Let's put some hard financial context to this to illustrate how extreme this is. Let's say in a simple transactional world, your average rep brings in $100,000 in revenue a year. Your star rep brings in $159,000. Not bad.
Not bad at all.
But in the modern, complex solutions world, your average rep is still only bringing in $100,000 because they're getting stonewalled by committees and consultants. Meanwhile, your star rep navigating those same committees is hauling in almost $300,000.
Now scale that math across a massive corporate enterprise. Think about a 100-person sales team. If the gap is 200%, the vast majority of your revenue is being generated by a tiny fraction of your workforce. It completely warps the operational reality of a company, leading to 3 stark, undeniable implications for management.
What is the first implication when the math gets that skewed?
Extreme key person dependency. When the talent gap widens to 200%, your stars are no longer just leading the team. They are literally carrying the entire financial weight of the company on their backs. One head of sales told the researchers a terrifying story. They had a massive sales force, but when they looked closely at the data, they realized just 2 or 3 reps were bringing in 80% of the divisional revenue.
That is corporate vulnerability at its worst. It's like an entire professional sports franchise relying entirely on one player. If that player rolls an ankle, or in the business world, gets poached by a competitor for a higher salary, the entire franchise collapses overnight.
Right.
You don't have a team, you have a hostage situation. Management is completely at the mercy of a few individuals.
It is deeply unhealthy for team dynamics, and it keeps executives awake at night. But this massive gap also creates the second reality, the astronomical ROI of coaching.
How did the talent gap change the math on training?
Think about the baseline. In the old transactional world, if you invested heavily in coaching an average rep and managed to get them halfway to being a star, you might see a 30% improvement in their output. That's a solid return.
Sure.
But in a complex solutions environment, the ceiling is so much higher. Moving an average rep just halfway across a 200% gap yields a near 100% improvement in performance. Closing that gap, even slightly, is worth exponentially more than it used to be.
Which fundamentally changes how companies should view leadership. Training and development isn't just an HR initiative to make people feel good. It is the absolute highest leverage financial investment a company can make. If you can move the middle of your pack even a few inches, your revenue doubles.
But that immense opportunity is tied directly to the third and most dangerous reality, the catastrophic penalty of inaction. As a company's business model evolves, as the products become more complex and the buyers become more guarded, if you leave your core performers untended, they won't just stay average.
They don't just plateau at $100,000.
No, they fall off a cliff. The environment becomes too complex for them to navigate at all. They become entirely unable to execute the new sales model. They'll burn through leads, alienate frustrated customers who are suffering from solutions fatigue, and eventually stop closing deals altogether. The middle ground completely disappears.
If you are an entrepreneur trying to scale a team, or a professional trying to secure your own career trajectory, you must internalize this reality. As the ideas, products, or services in your industry become more complex, natural talent and advanced skills scale exponentially. But average effort, the old way of just making a lot of calls and hoping for the best, falls flat.
It absolutely does.
You cannot afford to let your core skills stagnate. You must actively decode and adopt the specific behaviors of top performers, because the safe middle-of-the-pack territory is eroding rapidly.
It is a harsh truth, but ignoring it doesn't make it go away. The physics of persuasion have fundamentally changed. You are stepping into an arena with reluctant, hyper-cautious, consensus-driven customers who are struggling to buy complex solutions just as much as you are struggling to sell them.
This has been a massive paradigm shift. Let's synthesize all of the threads we have pulled today. We started with the mystery of the 2009 anomaly and traced it all the way to the psychology of the modern executive. What is the soul of this first chapter? What is the one singular insight we need to walk away with?
The central thesis is that the strategic shift to solution selling fundamentally broke the traditional buyer-seller dynamic. Suppliers, terrified of commoditization, bundled their products to protect their margins. But in doing so, they placed an exhausting, massive burden of discovery and operational risk onto the buyer.
And buyers are not passive participants. They felt the crushing weight of solutions fatigue, and they fortified their positions. They built consensus committees to share the blame. They demanded shared financial risk. They asked for customized integrations, and they hired ruthless third-party consultants to audit the margins.
Exactly. And because buyers are now fatigued and heavily fortified, the traditional tools of sales, like asking endless, open-ended discovery questions about what keeps them up at night, are effectively dead. Those tactics just annoy a buyer who expects you to already know the answer.
Success today is no longer about matching a product to a stated problem. It is about completely redefining how you engage with a buyer's internal risk. It is about how you guide them through a highly complex, hostile internal political environment.
Right.
And the data proves that only a very specific breed of star performer is capable of navigating this gauntlet, which is exactly why they are outperforming the average professional by nearly 200%.
The landscape is a minefield. The average reps are stepping on the tripwires of consensus and shared risk. Only one type of navigator actually possesses the map to find the safe path through.
We now know exactly why the world of business has become this complex, high-stakes minefield. We understand the deep currents. But the burning question remains, who exactly are these navigators? What is the specific behavioral profile of the winners?
It's fascinating.
And even more intriguingly, why is the exact personality type that almost all managers absolutely love, the hardworking, accommodating rep they bet their companies on, actually the one statistically doomed to fail in this new environment? That is exactly what we will uncover as we dive into the 5 profiles in the next chapter.
The breakdown of those 5 profiles is going to challenge everything most people believe about what makes someone persuasive. The data on who wins and who loses is truly counterintuitive.
It completely upended my view of leadership when I first read it. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought. Think back to the doctor analogy we discussed earlier. The frustration of the patient being asked to diagnose themselves.
Yeah.
If modern customers are so deeply exhausted by solutions fatigue and so intensely averse to doing the heavy lifting of diagnosing their own operational problems, what if the most valuable thing you could offer them isn't a solution at all?
Ooh, I like that.
What if the highest leverage asset you can bring into a meeting today is an unexpected insight that completely changes how the customer views their own business? Think about how that shifts the power dynamic. We'll explore exactly how to build those insights next time. What if the reason you or your company can't close a major deal today has absolutely nothing to do with the economy?
Right.
And, everything to do with the fact that your customers are just completely exhausted by your solutions.
It's a really sobering thought, honestly, especially when you realize that almost every professional for the last 2 decades has been trained to sell those exact solutions.
Yeah, exactly. So today we are doing a deep dive into the evolving journey of solution selling. And specifically, we are looking at how this widely adopted gold standard business model has completely fractured the business-to-business purchasing process.
It really has.
I mean, if you were trying to build a company, secure a partnership, or just get someone to say yes to a complex proposal, you are going to learn why the classic playbook is actively backfiring on you right now.
Yeah, the playbook is essentially broken.
We are going to unpack the massive talent gap that is currently dividing average performers from absolute stars. Because, understanding this shift is really the only way to survive in a purchasing environment that has grown incredibly hostile.
So true. And to really grasp the mechanics of this shift, I think we need to look at the pressure test that exposed the whole system.
Okay, take us there.
So think back to the early months of 2009.
Oh, man. Right.
Right. The global economy had just collapsed. The credit markets basically froze overnight. Cash was incredibly scarce.
Oh, it's terrifying.
Exactly. If you were a business leader or, particularly a head of sales, commerce had effectively ground to a complete halt.
Just a brick wall.
Yeah, you had organizations waking up every morning, sending their teams out into a market where the default answer to every single proposal was a non-negotiable, we have no budget.
Right. I mean, pipelines were just decimated. It wasn't just reluctance. It was this environment of pure survival where nobody was authorized to spend a single dime.
But amidst that total freeze, an anomaly emerged. The Sales Executive Council, which is a major research body, they started looking into the data and found a core mystery. Staring directly into the teeth of the toughest sale environment in generations, there was a uniquely gifted handful of reps who were still bringing in business.
Wait, really? In 2009?
In 2009. And they weren't just scraping by with small incremental deals. They were closing the kind of massive, complex business that most professionals dream of in a booming economy.
I mean, if I'm a sales executive in 2009, my company is bleeding cash. Like 95% of my team is completely paralyzed, and I have these 2 or 3 outliers closing multi-million-dollar contracts.
Well, my immediate thought is, how do I bottle whatever they're doing and force feed it to everyone else?
Naturally.
Like, is it luck? Do they just have an incredible Rolodex?
The researchers went in with that exact mandate, to find the secret to selling in a recession. But the economic downturn turned out to be a massive red herring.
A red herring. How so? Well, the recession exacerbated the gap between these star performers and the rest of the pack, but it didn't create the gap. The data revealed a structural failure that was already happening beneath the surface.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. These top performers weren't winning because they had a magic trick for beating the recession. They were winning because they had mastered an entirely new, incredibly complex buying environment, an environment that suppliers themselves had accidentally created.
So the economy was really just the tide going out, revealing the rocks that were already there.
That is exactly it.
And to understand what those rocks are, we have to look at the grand strategy that almost every major company adopted over the last 20 years. The mass migration to solution selling.
Right.
So we need to be specific about what a solution actually is in this context. It's the move away from the transactional sale of individual off-the-shelf products where you basically just compete on price.
Yeah. A race to the bottom.
Exactly. And the move toward consultative sales of broad integrated bundles of products and services.
And, the motivation behind that shift is completely rational. Suppliers were just desperate to escape relentless commoditization.
Which makes sense.
It does. As technology improves and globalization accelerates, individual products become virtually indistinguishable from one another.
Right.
If you are just selling a server or a piece of software or a logistics route, there is always going to be someone, somewhere, who can build a slightly cheaper version.
Always.
And when products aren't differentiated, the only thing you can compete on is price, which triggers a permanent race to the bottom. Your margins just evaporate.
You essentially become a utility at that point.
Yes.
But if I bundle my offering, like if I don't just sell you a server, but I sell you a comprehensive, secure cloud transition ecosystem, I have fundamentally changed the game.
Exactly. You reframe it.
I am no longer just a vendor fulfilling a purchase order. I am a strategic partner. A competitor can easily copy my server, sure, but it's exponentially harder for them to replicate my fully integrated, well-designed bundle of hardware, software, and consulting services.
Right, because it is so difficult to replicate, the supplier can finally protect their premium pricing.
It's a moat.
Exactly. It's a brilliant defensive strategy for preserving margins. And the research shows everyone rushed to do it. A full 75% of companies surveyed reported aspirations to become solutions providers.
Wow, 75%. That's a massive paradigm shift.
It is. But the hidden danger of this strategy lies in how it completely redefines the role of the person doing the selling.
Right, because it changes the job description from an order taker to basically a management consultant.
Yes.
In a transactional model, you just need to know your product catalog and, quote, a good price.
Yeah.
But in a solutions model, you're suddenly expected to be a trusted advisor.
You need boardroom-level business acumen.
Yeah, you have to understand your customers' industry dynamics, their internal political struggles, their long-term strategic goals. You are moving from a reactive posture to a highly proactive one.
And that transition introduces a massive structural vulnerability.
Tell me more about that.
Well, because when you promise a solution, you are making a very specific semantic commitment. You are promising to actually solve a complex business problem.
Right.
But you cannot solve a problem that you do not deeply understand.
Oh, so to understand a complex internal problem, you have to extract an enormous amount of information from the customer.
Exactly. The supplier has to diagnose the underlying challenges, identify new avenues for efficiency, figure out the specific metrics for success.
And how does the supplier get all this intimate knowledge?
They ask for it.
They ask for it.
They ask endlessly. This is the genesis of what the research identifies as the most destructive force in modern business-to-business commerce.
Which is?
The customer burden.
Ah, the customer burden.
Yes. Suppliers have spent decades training their teams to execute this protracted, exhausting discovery process.
It always starts with that incredibly cliché, supposedly empathetic question, doesn't it? What's keeping you up at night?
Oh, I hate that question.
Same. And from there, it launches into this grueling ping-pong match. The supplier asks a broad question. The customer tries to explain their highly nuanced, complex internal workflow.
Right.
The supplier takes notes, summarizes their understanding, and pitches an idea. Then the customer has to correct the summary because the supplier missed a crucial detail about how their compliance department operates.
And then the supplier goes back, revises the proposal, returns. The customer reviews it again. It just keeps going.
It sounds exhausting.
It is. This cycle creates two distinct, crushing burdens on the prospective client. The first is time.
Just the sheer hours involved.
Yeah, this discovery process demands a staggering commitment of internal resources. It isn't just one phone call with a vice president anymore.
Who else gets dragged in?
Everyone. The supplier needs to interview the IT department, the procurement team, the end users, the operations managers. They need conference calls, on-site workshops, countless review sessions.
Right, so that's the time burden. What's the second one?
The second burden is timing. Almost all of this intense, time-consuming effort is demanded up front, long before the customer sees a single drop of tangible value.
Oh, wow.
The supplier is essentially walking in and saying, please donate 40 hours of your executive team's time so I can learn how your business operates, and maybe eventually I'll come back with a proposal that justifies the time you just spent teaching me.
It is a monumental leap of faith for the buyer.
It's an arrogant demand, frankly.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a moment here. Because anyone who has ever taken a modern sales training course might be feeling a bit defensive right now.
I'm sure they are.
We are universally taught that asking what's keeping you up at night is the absolute gold standard of consultative business. It is supposed to demonstrate deep empathy.
Supposed to, yes.
We are taught that the best way to serve a client is to sit down, shut up, and let them articulate their pain points. How does empathy become a burden?
Because it isn't actually empathy, it is the delegation of labor.
The delegation of labor, I like that phrase.
From the seller's perspective, sitting back and listening feels highly respectful. But from the buyer's perspective, you are asking them to do the heavy lifting of diagnosing themselves.
That makes total sense when you frame it like that.
Think about the mechanics of going to a specialist physician. You go to a doctor because you have a complex set of symptoms you don't understand.
Right.
If that doctor sat down, handed you your MRI results, and said, so, what do you think is the best surgical intervention for this joint pain? Let's spend the next 3 hours brainstorming your physiology.
I would walk right out of the clinic.
Exactly. You are paying for their expertise, their diagnosis, and their prescription.
You want them to look at the MRI and say, I've seen this 1,000 times. Here's exactly what is wrong, and here's how we're going to fix it.
Yes. But when suppliers use the what keeps you up at night approach, they are acting like the doctor who wants the patient to write their own prescription.
Wow. And the psychological toll of this dynamic has created a widespread phenomenon in the research known as solutions fatigue.
Solutions fatigue, yes.
Customers are profoundly exhausted by the burden of having to teach suppliers how their own businesses run, just so the supplier can turn around and pitch them a product.
It's incredible.
Solutions fatigue. That captures it perfectly. It is the exhaustion of being treated like an unpaid consultant for the company trying to sell you something.
Spot on.
And here's where the narrative shifts. Because buyers didn't just accept this exhaustion. They didn't just keep taking the meetings.
No, they fought back.
They developed intense structural defense mechanisms to protect their time, their budgets, and honestly, their sanity. They completely rewrote the purchasing playbook to insulate themselves from this burden.
It is basic systems theory at work. A supplier initiates a complex action the solutions play to protect their own margins, and the market reacts with an equally complex countermove.
Cause and effect.
Exactly. The research outlines 4 highly specific trends in customer buying behavior that evolved as a direct retaliation against solution selling.
Okay, if you were trying to get a project approved or a deal signed right now, these 4 trends are the invisible brick walls you keep running into.
Yep.
Let's look at the mechanics of the first one. Trend 1. The rise of the consensus-based sale.
So, the core mechanism driving this trend is the sheer uncertainty inherent in a complex solution. When you were just buying a standalone server, the risk was localized. If the server failed, you just bought a new one.
Right, no big deal.
But when you're buying a massive integrated digital transformation ecosystem, the cost of failure is catastrophic. It can cripple an entire company.
So the stakes are way higher.
Much higher. Because the risk is so high, C-level executives absolutely refuse to shoulder the burden of that decision alone.
You used to be able to take a VP to a nice lunch, build a strong interpersonal relationship, and they would just sign the contract on their own authority.
Those days are entirely over. Senior decision makers now construct a human shield of consensus.
A human shield, wow.
They demand widespread organizational support before they will even consider moving forward.
Think about the mechanics of how a bill passes through a divided legislature.
That's a great analogy.
A simple, straightforward bill might pass easily, but a massive, complex, trillion-dollar spending package. Every single representative wants to review it, and every single one of them has veto power.
Yep.
Consensus-based selling is exactly like that. The risk of one person derailing the entire process skyrockets with every single stakeholder you are forced to add to the buying committee.
It's brutal. You might have the chief operating officer completely sold on the efficiency of your solution, but the COO won't sign without IT's approval.
And IT wants to review the system architecture.
Exactly. Then human resources needs to sign off on the user interface because of training time. Then procurement steps in to benchmark the pricing.
And finally, legal has to review the data privacy clauses.
And if the legal department decides they don't like the indemnification language, the entire deal collapses.
So the supplier is forced to run a political campaign across 5 different departments just to get a single signature.
Which introduces the second major defense mechanism, Trend 2, increased risk aversion.
How does that play out?
As these deals have grown in complexity and expense, customers have become hyper-focused on the gap between the promise of the solution and the actual realization of value.
Right, because they've all been burned before.
Exactly. They've all been burned by massive software implementations or consulting projects that promised to revolutionize their business but ultimately delivered nothing but disruption.
So the buyer says, if you want us to buy this massive, complex bundle, we are not going to carry all the risk. You are going to share it with us.
Yep.
How does that shared risk actually function in a contract? Like, what does that look like?
It fundamentally rewrites the metrics of success. In a transactional world, success is measured by the supplier's ability to deliver the product to the loading dock on time.
Sure.
But in a solutions world, buyers are increasingly demanding that success be measured by the performance of the customer's business.
Oh, wow. So is the difference between an architect getting paid when they hand over the blueprints versus an architect only getting paid if the finished building achieves a specific energy efficiency rating over its first 3 years of operation?
That is the exact mechanism. Let's say the supplier pitches a new logistics software, promising it will improve the customer's operating margins by 5%.
Okay.
The customer's response is, fantastic. We will hold back 30% of your payment, and you will only earn it if our operating margins actually improve by 5% over the next 12 months.
Man. So the supplier is essentially being forced to take an equity stake in the outcome of the tool's usage.
Yes.
That is terrifying because the supplier doesn't control how well the customer's employees actually use the software.
Exactly.
Like if the customer has terrible management and the employees just refuse to adopt the new tool, the supplier doesn't get paid for their product.
Right. Suppliers have to run directly at that risk. They have to build it into their value proposition just to get a seat at the table.
That is a huge hurdle.
It is. And as they take on that risk, the customer deploys their third defense mechanism. Trend 3. Greater demand for customization.
Customization. This one feels like a logical trap the suppliers basically built for themselves.
Oh, it is entirely self-inflicted. Suppliers generally view customization as a financial nightmare.
Because it destroys economies of scale.
Precisely. It requires unique engineering, it breaks standard operating procedures, and it creates an absolute nightmare for long-term maintenance and customer support. Suppliers want to sell a standardized bundle and call it a solution.
But look at the psychology of the buyer.
Right.
The buyer is taking on immense shared risk, and they have to get a massive committee to agree to this purchase. So the buyer says, you just spent 3 months running a deeply intrusive discovery process, telling me you were designing a bespoke, comprehensive solution to my unique business challenges.
Yep, you promised me a solution.
Exactly.
Okay.
My unique challenge requires this software to integrate with a legacy database we built in 1998, and it needs to generate a very specific compliance report every Tuesday. Why are you trying to charge me a premium for those features?
It's completely logical from their side.
Yeah, if it doesn't do exactly what my unique business needs it to do, it isn't a solution.
Customization is universally demanded by the buyer as a right, but no one wants to pay a premium for it. The supplier's own marketing language, the promise of a solution, has completely trapped them.
So what happens if the supplier tries to push back on the customization? Or if the internal consensus committee gets bogged down in technical debates they don't understand?
That's when the customer drops the ultimate hammer. Trend 4. The rise of third-party consultants.
Mercenaries.
The mercenaries. Because solutions have become so incredibly complex, customers frequently realize they lack the internal expertise to accurately evaluate what they are buying.
Right.
They don't know if the technical architecture is sound, and they certainly don't know if the pricing is fair. But they no longer trust the supplier to educate them, because the supplier is inherently biased toward closing the deal.
So they outsource the trust. They hire a neutral third-party expert to step in and navigate the complexity for them.
The explicit mandate of these consultants is to help the customer extract maximum value from the purchase.
Which is code for slashing prices.
Basically, this trend exploded globally during the recession. Corporations were desperate to cut operating costs, and simultaneously, the market was flooded with highly experienced industry veterans who had just been laid off.
Oh, right.
These newly minted consultants set up shop and sold their services with a completely irresistible value proposition.
How do they justify their fees? Like, what is the actual mechanic of how a consultant extracts value?
The mechanic is often a contingency fee based purely on cost reduction. A consultant will walk into a Fortune 500 company and say, I will audit all of your major vendor contracts. I will find the inefficiencies, I will renegotiate the terms, and I will save you millions of dollars.
And their fee.
My fee is simply 20% of whatever I save you. If I don't reduce your costs, you pay me nothing.
That is a brilliant zero-risk proposition for the buyer. But for the supplier trying to sell the solution, it is an absolute nightmare scenario.
It really is.
You are no longer negotiating with a slightly confused IT director. You are negotiating with a professional interrogator whose literal mortgage depends on squeezing your profit margins to the absolute breaking point.
And these consultants are incredibly aggressive. They will strip away all the highly profitable value-added services the supplier tried to bundle into the solution.
They just unbundle it.
Exactly. They will demand line-item pricing so they can commoditize every individual component. They will even go backward and audit prior deals, threatening to pull future business unless the supplier agrees to retroactive rebates.
Wow. Retroactive rebates. That's harsh.
So let's synthesize this environment for a second.
Okay.
As a supplier, you initiate a solution sale. In response, you have to navigate a labyrinth of a dozen different stakeholders who all have veto power.
Check.
You have to accept severe financial penalties if the customer fails to achieve their own business metrics.
Yeah.
You have to rebuild your product to fit their idiosyncratic demands without charging them for it. And you have to do all of this while a mercenary consultant is actively trying to bleed your margins dry.
You can execute the entire play perfectly, win all of the customer's business, and still make absolutely no money because the complexity and the consultants stripped all the profit out of the deal.
Exactly. The environment has become exponentially more hostile.
And the hard truth the researchers uncovered is that even as the global economy fully recovered from the recession, Selling didn't get any easier.
No, it didn't.
The procurement hurdles didn't go away. The consultants didn't close up shop. The complexity is permanent. Which brings us to the human cost of this system.
Yeah.
We have to look at what this brutal environment is doing to the actual people trying to operate within it.
This is where the data gets incredibly granular regarding the widening talent gap.
Let's get into the numbers.
The researchers wanted to measure the specific toll this complex environment takes on human performance. So they ran a comparative analysis. They looked at the distribution of performance in traditional transactional selling environments and compared it to companies executing complex solution sales.
Okay, transactional first.
In a transactional environment where the rep is basically competing on features and price, the gap between an average or core performer and a star performer is roughly 59%.
A 59% gap makes intuitive sense. You have an average employee who does their job, and then you have a highly motivated star who works a little longer, has a bit more charisma, and maybe understands the technical specs a little better. They pull ahead by about half, but everyone is still essentially playing the same game on the same field.
But when the researchers analyzed the solution selling environment, the data fractured completely.
What happened?
In companies executing complex sales, star performers outperform core performers by almost 200%.
200%. That is insane.
It represents a four-fold increase in the talent gap. When the environment shifts from transactional to complex solutions, the gap between average and great doesn't just widen, it explodes.
A 200% performance gap isn't just a statistical anomaly. It points to a total systemic failure in how average professionals are equipped to handle modern complexity.
The physical laws of the profession fundamentally change. The average rep is completely crushed by the weight of the consensus committee and the third-party consultants, while a tiny fraction of elite performers are somehow thriving.
There is a terrifying real-world example of this in the research from the chief sales officer of a massive global logistics company.
Oh, that example is striking.
They audited their revenue streams and discovered that out of a global sales force of 100 representatives, just 2 individuals were responsible for bringing in 80% of the entire company's revenue.
2 people carrying a 100-person organization.
That level of skew forces leadership to confront 3 incredibly urgent conclusions about how they manage human capital in a complex world. Let's break those down. What is the first mandate when you realize your talent is skewed that heavily?
Conclusion number 1 is that you have to aggressively protect your stars.
Of your stars.
Exactly. In a solutions environment, your top performers aren't just hitting their quarterly quotas, they are the structural, load-bearing pillars of the entire enterprise.
You have a catastrophic key person dependency problem. If those 2 reps at the logistics company get frustrated with management and get poached by a competitor, the company doesn't just miss a revenue target, it faces an immediate existential threat to its survival.
Right. You have to identify exactly who is actually navigating this complexity and build a fortress around them. Give them whatever they need.
But a business cannot scale or even survive long-term if it is entirely dependent on 2 people, which leads to the second and arguably most lucrative conclusion.
The immense untapped value of the middle.
Because the performance gap is 200%, the mathematics of employee training completely change.
Precisely. In a traditional transactional world, if you invest a massive amount of time, coaching, and resources into an average rep, and you successfully get them halfway to being a star, you might see a 30% boost in their output.
That is a solid return, but it might not justify tearing down and rebuilding your entire training infrastructure.
Right. However, in a complex solutions world, the gap is so incredibly vast that if you can move an average performer just halfway to the level of a star, you yield a nearly 100% improvement in their performance.
You literally double their output just by getting them to the halfway mark.
Exactly.
Elevating your core performers is no longer an HR initiative. It is the single largest financial lever a company can pull.
But to pull that lever, you have to understand conclusion number 3, which is the terrifying penalty of inaction.
What happens if a company looks at this complex environment, looks at their struggling average reps, and decides to just, maintain the status quo?
If you leave your core performers untended in a solutions environment, they will not simply muddle through and miss their quotas by a few percentage points.
It's worse than that.
Much worse.
Right.
They will fall so completely behind that they will become fundamentally incapable of executing the business model. They do not have the inherent skills to navigate a 10-person consensus committee. They will get absolutely slaughtered by the third-party consultants. They will be entirely shut out of the market.
The average professional isn't just having a sluggish quarter. The fundamental architecture of how business is transacted has been redesigned to specifically exploit their weaknesses.
That's a great way to put it.
The traits that made someone an acceptable average performer in the year 2005 make them a catastrophic liability today.
The environment demands a level of strategic synthesis that the average playbook simply does not teach.
Let's pull all of these systemic failures together and look at the ultimate irony of this entire paradigm.
It is deeply ironic.
We adopted solution selling because we were terrified of commoditization. We wanted to escape the price wars, protect our margins, and build deeper, more secure relationships with our clients.
But the mechanism we chose to achieve that safety required us to force the customer to do the incredibly heavy lifting of diagnosing their own complex internal failures.
And by forcing that burden onto the buyer, we triggered a massive systemic retaliation.
We did.
We engineered an ecosystem that made buying infinitely more complicated, infinitely more risky, and utterly exhausting. We forced buyers to build fortresses of consensus, demand impossible shared risk metrics, insist on free customization, and hire mercenary consultants to please the boarders.
We built a machine that is so hostile and so unforgiving that it physically broke the vast majority of the workforce attempting to operate within it.
It's staggering when you step back and look at it.
Only a microscopic fraction of our talent, these rare, elite stars, can actually survive the complexity we created.
It is a profound structural failure. And the implications of this extend far beyond the sales department of a logistics company. It challenges the fundamental way we interact with anyone we are trying to influence.
It really does. It demands a deeply personal audit of your own professional strategies.
Whether you are selling a multi-million-dollar software architecture, trying to pitch a new operational initiative to your board of directors, or simply trying to define the value of your startup to a skeptical early adopter, you have to look at the mechanics of your approach.
Ask yourself, are you accidentally engineering solutions fatigue for your audience?
Right.
Are you walking into the room and asking them to do the exhausting work of figuring out exactly what they need?
Are you asking them what keeps you up at night and hoping they will hand you the blueprint for how to solve their problems? Because if you are triggering all of those defense mechanisms.
You are inviting the consensus, the risk aversion, and the delay.
Instead of asking them to diagnose themselves, are you bringing them a compelling, disruptive insight?
Are you teaching them something they didn't know about a problem they didn't realize they had?
That is the pivotal shift. If the traditional, highly consultative, interrogative approach is completely dead, we are left with the massive question of what those two reps at the logistics company are actually doing.
Right. How are they surviving?
If they aren't asking what keeps you up at night, how are they navigating the consultants? How are they bypassing the consensus committees and closing 80% of the revenue? What is the specific, replicable mechanism of their success?
That is the real million-dollar question.
Well, that is exactly what we will unpack in our next deep dive.
What if the exact traits you've been taught make a great salesperson? Being agreeable, endlessly accommodating, and focusing entirely on building a warm, friendly relationship are actually the exact reasons people fail in today's complex business world.
I mean, it is a genuinely terrifying thought,
Yeah.
especially for anyone who has spent their entire professional life trying to be the ultimate people pleaser.
Right.
Yeah, if that foundation is flawed, it means the traditional playbook for influence and persuasion is essentially obsolete.
And that is the exact shift we are exploring in today's deep dive. We're looking at a groundbreaking, completely data-driven model for high performance.
Sourced directly from the Challenger sale.
Exactly. Specifically, we're focusing on the chapter that outlines this completely new model for high performance. We're going to explore why the traditional, relationship builder is rapidly losing ground.
And why a specific, honestly, completely counterintuitive profile called the Challenger is dominating the landscape.
Yeah. Right. And this matters to you listening right now, whether you are an entrepreneur selling a product or a manager pitching a new operational strategy to your executive board.
Or even just a professional trying to influence a cross-functional team.
Totally. The rules of persuasion have fundamentally changed. But to truly understand why this shift happened, we need to bypass all the theoretical stuff and look at a very specific, incredibly painful moment in business history.
Oh, yeah. The early months of the 2009 global economic crash.
Right, because early 2009 was not just a standard recession.
No, not at all. It was an absolute nightmare for B2B commerce. If you look back at that specific window,
Yeah.
customers hadn't just tightened their belt.
They had basically vanished overnight.
Vanished. Commerce had practically ground to a halt. Credit was entirely frozen.
Yeah, and staring directly into the teeth of the toughest, most unforgiving sales environment in generations, sales executives across the globe were absolutely panicked.
They were terrified. I mean, they were sending their teams into boardrooms and onto conference calls where a yes was virtually impossible to secure.
The default answer for literally every company was simply, we are not spending money.
Right. But amidst all that doom and gloom, a really bizarre mystery emerged in the data.
This is the part I love.
A small, uniquely gifted group of top performers were still selling.
Wait, really? In 2009?
Yes. And they weren't just barely scraping by to make quota either. They were bringing in the kind of complex, high-margin business that most people only dream of in a booming economy.
Which, I mean, that feels entirely impossible when you consider the context. Entire purchasing departments were given explicit directives from their CEOs to freeze all external spending.
Right.
So if the budget doesn't exist, how is anyone closing a massive deal?
Well, that was the exact question that prompted this research. Into this frozen, terrified economic environment, the Sales Executive Council,
The SEC.
right, the SEC, they launched a massive, unprecedented study to figure out what this elite group of outliers was doing differently.
Okay, let's unpack this. What did the study actually look like?
So they surveyed frontline sales managers across 90 different companies worldwide. And they ultimately gathered and analyzed data on about 6,000 sales reps.
Wow, 6,000.
Yeah, it's a huge data set. And the crucial detail here is that they didn't just ask managers for, subjective opinions on who was doing well.
Because everyone just picks their favorite, right?
Exactly.
Huh.
Instead, they rigorously tested 44 different, highly specific attributes.
So we're talking about attitudes, skills, demonstrated behaviors.
Daily activities and baseline industry knowledge. Everything.
Now, I want to pause on that specific focus on attributes and behaviors, because my immediate thought, and I'm certain this is a default assumption for almost anyone listening, is that these top performers simply have that innate, untouchable it factor.
Oh, the magic charisma.
Right. We've all heard the cliches, someone has the gift of gab, or they possess a reality distortion field like Steve Jobs.
Yeah, or they are just a natural-born salesperson with off-the-charts empathy. Well, that is the exact trap, really the great myth of the sales profession that most of us fall into. The assumption that influence is just this genetic lottery.
But wait, isn't sales inherently about natural talent?
You'd think so, but the researchers designed this study explicitly to avoid that trap. This was definitively not a personality test.
So no Myers-Briggs.
No Myers-Briggs, no Enneagram. They deliberately chose not to measure innate traits like natural charisma or baseline extroversion.
Why not, though?
Because from a management and organizational perspective, you cannot coach charisma.
Oh.
Think about it practically. If I am your sales manager and we are doing a quarterly review, and I look at your numbers and say, you need to be more charismatic.
What am I actually supposed to do with that feedback when I go back to my desk?
Exactly.
There's literally nothing actionable there. I'd probably just smile wider, wear a brighter tie, and laugh entirely too loud at the client's jokes.
Which would be super awkward.
Super awkward. And it wouldn't help me close a complex enterprise deal. I always think of it like evaluating basketball players based solely on their height.
Ooh, that's a good analogy.
Right. Being incredibly charismatic in sales is like being naturally 7 feet tall in basketball. Yes, if you are 7 feet tall, the game is inherently easier for you.
Obviously.
But a coach cannot teach a 5'10" player how to be taller.
Right. What the researchers were looking for were the equivalents of, like, shooting a perfect free throw or running a flawless pick and roll.
Yeah. They measured demonstrated observable behaviors.
That basketball analogy tracks perfectly with the SEC's methodology. They measured observable, coachable actions.
Like what specifically?
So things like, does the representative strictly adhere to the company's designated sales process?
Okay.
Do they demonstrate deep business acumen regarding the client's specific industry? Are they visibly willing to risk disapproval from the customer in order to make a point?
Which is huge.
Right. The distinction is vital because behaviors can be coached, modeled, and changed over time. personality, for the most part, is largely fixed by the time you enter the workforce.
Yeah, if organizational success relied entirely on natural, unteachable charisma, companies would be completely helpless.
They'd just be at the mercy of their hiring pipeline.
By deliberately focusing on coachable behaviors, the sources reveal something incredibly empowering for us.
A literal step-by-step roadmap to elevate the entire middle 60% of a company's workforce.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Your fundamental internal narrative has to shift.
Totally.
If you've ever felt like you couldn't pitch an idea because you weren't the loudest, most gregarious person in the room, let that go.
You really have to.
You need to stop asking yourself, do I have the right personality to influence people? And start asking, am I consistently practicing the right behaviors?
Yeah.
Which brings us to the first major structural revelation of the SEC's data. Because when the researchers took these 44 discrete behaviors and ran them through a statistical factor analysis,
Wow, this part is so cool.
the results weren't just a random, scattered plot of skills.
Right. And for anyone who isn't a data scientist, statistical factor analysis sounds super intimidating, but the concept is actually quite intuitive.
Break it down for us.
Imagine you have a massive bowl containing 44 different ingredients. You toss them all together, but instead of forming a uniform mixture, you notice that certain ingredients naturally magnetically attract to one another.
Like the spices clumped together over here, the sugars clumped together over there.
Exactly. In this study, the researchers found that these 44 behaviors naturally clump together into 5 distinct, highly recognizable profiles.
It's like going to a university.
How do you mean?
Well, every student entering the business world has to take a core curriculum, right? Every representative out there possesses some baseline of basic product knowledge, some fundamental communication skills, and, the ability to send an email.
Sure.
But eventually, just like at a university, every single student declares a major. They specialize in a certain approach.
Oh, I see.
And the data emphatically showed that almost every single person out there interacting with customers majors in one of these 5 distinct profiles.
Exactly. Every rep leans on a specific cluster of behaviors when they are trying to drive an outcome or when they are placed under professional pressure.
And these profiles are so universally accurate that they transcend industry, geography, and product type.
They really do. You will recognize these people immediately.
Let's explore these 5 faces of sales. Because as we detail each one, you, listening right now, are absolutely going to recognize your current colleagues, your former managers, and in all likelihood, you are going to recognize your own default operating system.
Oh, for sure.
Let's start with the first profile. Rather than just listing them out, let's look at the underlying psychology of the volume-driven approach.
That would be the hard worker.
The grinder.
Exactly. The hard worker operates on a deeply ingrained philosophy of input equaling output.
Right.
They are the ones who show up at the office before the lights are fully on, and they are the absolute last ones to log off the VPN at night.
They send emails at 11 p.m.
Always. They are highly self-motivated, fiercely dedicated, and they are constantly knocking on their manager's door, seeking feedback on how to optimize their daily routine.
Because their fundamental, unshakable belief is that doing the right things, making 20 more cold calls than the next person, sending 50 more personalized emails.
Grinding out 3 more custom proposals over the weekend.
Right, that all of that will inevitably, mathematically yield positive results.
It is a pure, unadulterated volume game for them.
They are the ultimate nose-to-the-grindstone player. We all know that person. They treat sales like it's a marathon of attrition.
Yeah, if the conversion rate is low, their only answer is to simply run more miles.
Exactly. Contrast that, though, with the second profile, because this next one couldn't care less about call volume. They are entirely focused on emotional resonance.
You're referring to the relationship builder.
The classic.
This profile is entirely constructed around the concept of amiability and accessibility. The relationship builder is incredibly generous with their time.
So generous.
They focus their energy on building strong, warm, internal advocates within the client's organization. Their entire posture toward the customer is essentially, whatever you need, whenever you need it, I am here for you.
They're the ones suggesting coffee meetings, organizing the golf outings.
Constantly checking in just to, quote, see how things are going.
Yes, they prioritize harmony, avoiding conflict at literally all costs.
Because their core belief is that if a prospect likes them enough, the business will naturally follow.
They are the ultimate crowd-pleasing politician. They equate personal friction with professional failure. Like, if a meeting ends with smiles and handshakes, they consider it a massive win. even if absolutely no actual business problem was solved.
We had a great chat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then, moving across the spectrum, we hit the third profile. And this represents a complete departure from both the hard worker's discipline and the relationship builder's need for harmony.
Oh, man. This might be the most fascinating and definitely the most agonizing profile for any sales director to manage.
Deeply self-confident, deeply independent, and deeply frustrating to their superiors.
The lone wolf.
The lone wolf.
The lone wolf follows their own distinct instincts, actively ignoring the established corporate rules.
They notoriously despise the company's CRM system.
They hate Salesforce. They refuse to log their calls. They conveniently forget to submit their mandatory trip reports, and they basically do things entirely their way or not at all.
They drive middle management to the absolute brink of insanity.
They really do. But there's a massive caveat here.
Which is
they usually hit or exceed their revenue numbers, which is literally the only reason they haven't been escorted out of the building by HR.
right. A great way to visualize the lone wolf isn't just the cliché maverick movie detective who wrecks police cars.
Sure.
Think of them more like a brilliant but profoundly messy senior software engineer.
Oh, that's perfect.
They write code that absolutely no one else in the company can read or debug. They refuse to document their processes. They show up at noon and work until 3 a.m.
And the engineering manager absolutely hates dealing with them.
Hates them. But when the servers crash, this is the literal only person who can magically fix the core architecture in 20 minutes.
Right.
You can't fire them, but you also can't clone them. And you certainly can't build a scalable company around them.
That's a perfect analogy, because the lone wolf's success is entirely idiosyncratic.
Yeah.
You cannot extract their methodology and teach it to a junior employee.
It's all just instinct.
Exactly. Now, the fourth profile shifts away from that arrogant independence and moves into a highly reactive posture.
The reactive problem solver. Yes.
Which, I mean, it sounds like somebody you definitely want on your team. Everyone wants a problem solver.
You absolutely want them in your company, but the SEC data suggests you might not want them in a quota-carrying sales role.
Why is that?
Well, the reactive problem solver is highly reliable and deeply detail-oriented. But their defining characteristic is that they operate fundamentally as a customer service representative wearing a salesperson's title. They focus disproportionately on post-sale follow-up. They want to ensure that every single minor promise is kept and every implementation detail is flawless.
Which sounds good until you realize what they aren't doing.
Right. If a client calls with a minor software bug or a, billing discrepancy, the reactive problem solver will immediately drop everything, including prospecting for new, high-value business, to personally fix that minor issue.
They are the ultimate internal fixer. Their comfort zone is fixing a broken process rather than facing the rejection of pitching a new one.
That's exactly it. They feel incredibly productive because they are constantly busy putting out fires all day. But at the end of the quarter, their pipeline of new business is entirely empty.
Completely dry.
Which leaves us with the fifth and final profile, the namesake of our entire analysis, and the group that completely upended the SEC's understanding of high performance.
The challenger.
The challenger.
The defining characteristic of the challenger is that they are, at their core, a debater.
A debater.
Yes. They possess a profound, intricately detailed understanding of the customer's business model. But unlike the relationship builder, who uses business knowledge to find common ground and, placate the customer.
The challenger uses their deep understanding to respectfully push the customer's thinking.
Exactly. They are assertive. They aren't afraid to share views that are contrarian, unconventional, or potentially controversial.
And crucially, they maintain this assertive posture not just with their prospects, but with their own internal management team.
They'll push back on their boss just as fast as they'll push back on a client.
So, to synthesize this landscape we just built, we have the hard worker grinding out volume.
Right.
The relationship builder seeking harmony, the lone wolf relying on unscalable instinct, the reactive problem solver hiding in customer support.
And the challenger actively debating the client.
Right. Now, I want you, the listener, to take a moment of genuine self-reflection. When the stakes are really high, when you are under immense pressure to deliver a result, which of those profiles do you naturally default to?
It's a tough question to answer, honestly.
It is. And perhaps more importantly, look at the culture of your current organization. Which profile is your company actively writing job descriptions for, praising in all-hands meetings, and rewarding with promotions?
Most likely, it's not the challenger.
Exactly, because this is the exact moment the Earth shifts under our feet. The researchers didn't just theoretically identify these 5 groups.
No, they didn't. What's fascinating here is they map them directly against actual verifiable sales performance.
And the way they segmented that performance data is absolutely vital.
Right. They split the thousands of reps into 2 categories. You had your core performers, representing the massive middle tier of average results, and you had your star performers, representing the elite top 20%.
Okay, so let's look at the average group first.
When you look exclusively at the core, average performers, the statistical distribution is almost entirely flat.
Flat.
Yeah. You find roughly 20% of average performers are hard workers, 20% are relationship builders, 20% are challengers, and so on.
Oh, wow. So mediocrity, it turns out, comes in all 5 flavors.
It really does. You can be an aggressively average rep using literally any of these methodologies.
But the SEC wasn't looking to understand mediocrity. They were hunting for the secret of the elite top 20% who are absolutely thriving in a frozen 2009 economy.
Exactly.
So when they looked at the star performers, did that flat distribution hold up?
Not even close. Among the star performers, the even distribution shatters completely, revealing a massive, statistically overwhelming skew.
This is the moment of truth. Let's look at the winner and the loser. Who dominates the top tier?
The undisputed winner, pulling away from the pack by a massive margin, is the challenger.
The challenger.
They make up nearly 40% of all high performers in the entire global study.
Almost half of all the elite, quota-crushing performers fit into just one single behavioral profile.
It's staggering.
That alone is wild. But the other side of the coin is equally important. Who falls to the absolute bottom of the pack among star performers?
The relationship builder.
Ouch.
Yeah. They make up a remarkably dismal 7% of star performers.
Yeah.
They finish dead last.
7%. That isn't just a slight underperformance. That is a statistical collapse.
And it is deeply troubling to sales executives because most companies have spent the last decade explicitly hiring and rewarding relationship builders.
Right. Now, I have to push back here because I want to represent the listener who has been told from the very first day of their professional career that, quote, business is all about relationships. It is the most universally accepted cliche in corporate America. Are the sources genuinely suggesting that relationships do not matter? That the old adage, people buy from people they like, is a total lie?
I get this question all the time.
Because logically, if I walk into a complex enterprise software pitch and act like an argumentative debater, introducing constant tension and effectively acting like a jerk, I am definitely going to burn that bridge. In a B2B sales cycle that might span 18 months and involve 20 different stakeholders, doesn't introducing constant constructive tension just exhaust the client and nuke the relationship before the contract is even drafted?
That is the most important pushback, and it highlights a critical nuance that is so often misunderstood. The sources are absolutely categorically not saying that you should be a jerk.
Okay, good.
Or that relationships are irrelevant. If you are aggressive, arrogant, or if stakeholders actively dislike you as a human being, you will fail. Full stop.
Right. Nobody wants to work with a jerk.
Exactly. A functional working relationship is a baseline prerequisite for doing any business anywhere.
So what's the difference then?
The SEC's finding represents a massive shift in the sequencing of that relationship.
The sequencing?
Yes. In today's highly complex business environment, a strong, resilient relationship is the result and the reward of providing genuine business value. It is no longer the cause of the sale.
Wow. That is an incredibly powerful distinction. The relationship is the reward of value, not the cause. Let's really linger on that aha moment.
Yeah, let's.
Because I want to paint a vivid picture of what happens when you get this sequencing wrong. Imagine the classic relationship builder.
Okay.
They spend 3 months courting a VP of supply chain. They take them out for expensive steak dinners. They play a beautiful 18 holes of golf. They know the names of the VP's kids.
They send a nice bottle of wine at Christmas.
Exactly. And they genuinely get along. They have fantastic chemistry.
Right.
They submit their proposal feeling incredibly confident. And then the VP calls them to say they gave the multi-million-dollar contract to a competitor.
It happens every day.
And the relationship builder is standing in the parking lot completely baffled, thinking, what happened? We had such a great relationship.
And if that relationship builder could hear the internal monologue of that VP, they would hear exactly what the SEC data uncovered.
Which is what?
Customers today are essentially saying, I really like you as a person, we have a genuinely great relationship, and I love playing golf with you. But I am giving this massive contract to your competitor because they actually brought me better business value. They're saying, they taught me something new about my own supply chain that I hadn't realized. The relationship builder's entire strategy is focused on being accepted into the customer's comfort zone. They want to be a welcome guest.
Right.
The challenger, however, intentionally pushes the customer out of their comfort zone. And the counterintuitive reality is that B2B customers actually deeply value being pushed.
Wait, they want to be pushed.
Yes.
Yes.
Because that zone of discomfort is the only place where they learn how to fundamentally save money, mitigate massive organizational risk, or capture new market share.
So when we talk about burning bridges over an 18-month sales cycle, the distinction is really between personal aggression and intellectual tension.
Exactly. A challenger isn't insulting the client. They are challenging the client's ideas and their status quo.
Right. Familiarity, pleasantness, and an eagerness to acquiesce are simply not powerful enough levers to move a reluctant, risk-averse decision maker.
Especially one who is putting their own career on the line to approve a massive budget expenditure.
Exactly. Being a wonderfully nice person who buys premium donuts for the procurement office is a lovely gesture.
Everyone loves donuts.
But it does absolutely nothing to give a chief financial officer a justifiable reason to sign a $2 million software integration contract.
Precisely. The CFO isn't looking for a new friend. They're looking for a business outcome.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If we accept this reality, if we accept that to perform in the elite top 20%, we need to abandon the pure relationship builder playbook and adopt the challenger methodology.
We have to dissect exactly what that 40% majority is doing differently.
Yes, we need to break down the anatomical structure of a challenger interaction.
Right. And the sources distill the challenger's methodology into 3 defining, actionable pillars.
Let's hear them.
They teach, they tailor, and they take control.
Teach, tailor, take control. Let's break down the mechanics of each one, starting with teach.
Okay.
Because immediately the word teach sounds inherently arrogant to me.
It does sound a bit pushy.
It conjures up this image of a salesperson walking into a client's office, firing up a 90-slide PowerPoint presentation, and just lecturing a seasoned executive on how their own industry works.
Right. And it's crucial to understand that teaching in the challenger model is emphatically not a product lecture. It is not about teaching the client how brilliant your software features are.
So what are they teaching?
Teaching in this specific context is about offering the customer a unique, disruptive perspective on their own business operations.
Okay, give me some context on why that works.
To understand why this is so powerful, we have to look at the failure of conventional sales wisdom. For decades, the gold standard of sales training has been to go in, sit down with the client, and ask open-ended diagnostic questions.
Like, what is keeping you up at night?
Exactly. Or, what are your top 3 strategic priorities for Q4? You are basically taught to act like an investigative journalist trying to uncover the client's hidden needs.
Which, if we are being completely honest, sounds utterly exhausting for the modern B2B customer.
Oh, they hate it.
If I'm an executive, my internal reaction to a vendor asking me what keeps me up at night is going to be incredibly defensive.
Naturally.
I'm sitting there thinking, I have no idea what the specific blind spots in my supply chain are. That is literally why I agreed to take a meeting with an expert like you. If you don't know why you're here, why are we wasting this hour?
You've just perfectly articulated what the sources define as solutions fatigue.
Solutions fatigue.
Modern enterprise customers are completely exhausted by the burden of having to diagnose their own operational illnesses for every single vendor that walks through the door.
I can totally see that.
The customer is tired of doing all the heavy lifting in the discovery phase. The challenger completely flips this script.
How so?
A challenger never asks what is keeping the customer up at night. Instead, they do the intense analytical work beforehand, and they walk into the room and tell the customer what should be keeping them up at night.
Oh, wow. They bring undeniable data-backed insight.
Exactly.
Let's ground this in a highly specific, realistic B2B scenario to explain the mechanism.
Sure.
Imagine you were selling an advanced AI-driven logistics tracking software to a VP of supply chain. And this VP currently believes their third-party logistics provider is doing a good enough job.
Okay.
A relationship builder walks in and asks, "So how are your shipping times?" And the VP says, "Fine," and the conversation just dies right there.
Right. Dead in the water.
How does the challenger execute the teach pillar in this exact room?
The challenger has already analyzed broader industry data before the meeting even happens. They walk in and say something like, "We've analyzed the freight routing patterns of your top 3 competitors over the last 6 months. What we've discovered is a hidden inefficiency in how mid-tier LTL less-than-truckload freight is being batched in the Midwest corridor."
Okay, very specific.
Extremely. Then they drop the hammer. Your current provider is likely passing a hidden 14% fuel surcharge variance down to you, which, based on your public shipment volume, is bleeding roughly $800,000 in unrecognized EBITDA every quarter. Here is the data showing exactly how that leakage happens.
Wow. They don't ask about problems at all.
No, they illuminate a massive invisible problem the VP didn't even know existed. They teach the customer something entirely new, highly disruptive, and financially material about how to compete in their own specific market.
That is brilliant, but it requires a staggering amount of confidence and preparation.
It does. It's not easy.
Which leads us seamlessly into the second pillar, tailor. Because you cannot just walk into an enterprise organization with one generic boilerplate insight and expect it to land with every single person on the executive committee.
Right, and this is where the mechanism of tailoring becomes vital. In a complex B2B sale, you are never just convincing one person.
No, it's a whole room.
You are building consensus across a highly fractured buying committee. You will inevitably have to present to the CEO, the chief financial officer, the chief marketing officer, the head of IT, the end users.
Everyone has an opinion.
And the traditional relationship builder walks into each of those offices and delivers the exact same friendly, generalized pitch about how great their company is.
Right.
The challenger understands that a unified message is a failing message. Tailoring means you have cultivated a superior granular knowledge of the specific value drivers and economic metrics that govern each individual stakeholder.
It's basically about knowing exactly how each person in the room gets their year-end bonus.
That is exactly what it is. The challenger knows that the chief marketing officer fundamentally cares about brand equity, market penetration, and lead generation velocity.
Sure.
So if you bring them an insight about logistics, you have to frame it around how faster delivery increases net promoter scores and drives repeat customer acquisition.
But when you go to the CFO...
When the challenger crosses the hall to speak to the CFO, they completely abandon the marketing metrics.
The CFO doesn't care about brand equity.
Not at all. They know the CFO's bonus is tied to risk mitigation, capital efficiency, and cash flow predictability. The challenger mathematically tailors the insight to resonate perfectly with the specific, selfish economic driver of the person sitting across from them.
They speak the native financial language of every distinct department.
Precisely.
Which is incredibly hard work. It requires an operational fluency that most salespeople simply refuse to develop.
Because it's a lot easier to just hand out brochures.
Right. But let's assume you've done it. You've taught the client a disruptive insight. You've perfectly tailored the message to build consensus across the C-suite.
Okay.
That brings us to the final and undoubtedly the most psychologically uncomfortable pillar of the challenger anatomy. Take control.
Yes. Taking control is where the entire methodology is either validated or destroyed.
Why is it so critical?
Because challengers are fundamentally comfortable discussing money, and they are completely comfortable pressing the customer when pushback inevitably occurs.
Yeah.
In any complex deal, there is always a moment of friction.
Always. Usually around price, implementation timeline, or resource allocation.
Right. And challengers do not cave the moment they face that resistance.
Let's role-play the mechanics of this, because
Yeah.
this is where the relationship builder usually falls apart.
Oh, completely.
So the client says, "We love the insight, we love the software, everyone on the board is aligned, but your proposal is $2.4 million. We only have $2.1 million budgeted. We need a straight 12% discount to get this signed today." What happens?
Well, the relationship builder instantly panics. Their internal alarm bells ring because their primary goal is preserving harmony.
And a price negotiation is inherently a conflict.
Exactly. To avoid that conflict, they will immediately fold. They'll say, "Oh, let me call my VP of sales and see what I can do," essentially functioning as a discount delivery service for the procurement department.
Right, they just cave.
But the challenger, however, holds their ground. They do not blink. They use the momentum of the first pillar, the teaching, to take control.
How do they phrase it?
They calmly bring the conversation back to the asymmetrical value they just uncovered. They might say, I understand budget constraints are tight, but let's review the math we agreed on yesterday. The mid-tier freight leakage we identified is costing you roughly $3.2 million annually.
Oh, wow.
Delaying this implementation to negotiate a $300,000 discount means you will bleed another $260,000 this month alone while we argue over the price. The value of solving this structural flaw immediately far outweighs the discount you are asking for. So how do we move forward on the original terms to stop that bleeding?
It is a complete refusal to commoditize their own value.
Yes.
I want to introduce a concept here that I think perfectly encapsulates this dynamic. Constructive tension.
Constructive tension. I like that.
A relationship builder views any tension as a failure of the relationship and tries to diffuse it at all costs. A challenger views tension as a necessary, highly effective tool.
Right.
Think about the mechanics of going to a physical therapist or an elite personal trainer.
Oh, yeah.
If your personal trainer just lets you lift the comfortable lightweight dumbbells every session simply because you complain that the heavy ones make your arms hurt, you will literally never get stronger.
Just plateau immediately.
Exactly. A truly great trainer pushes you right to the absolute limit of your discomfort, and they forcefully hold you there despite your complaining, because physiologically that point of maximum tension is the only place where muscle tissue breaks down and new growth occurs.
That is a brilliant way to frame it.
In a complex business environment, that intellectual discomfort is the exact equivalent. It is the only place where a massive change in strategic perspective, and therefore a massive purchase decision, can actually happen.
And if we connect this to the broader psychological picture, it explains deeply why the challenger methodology is so incredibly difficult to execute in reality.
Why is it so hard for people?
Because human nature, at a biological level, fundamentally seeks closure, safety, and comfort.
Right. We want to be liked by the tribe.
Exactly. It is naturally, viscerally uncomfortable to look a senior executive or a skeptical client, or even your own boss, directly in the eye and say, I understand why you believe your current strategy is sound, but I actually think it is fundamentally flawed, and here is data proving why.
It feels aggressive.
Our brains are wired to avoid that kind of tribal conflict. But challengers have painstakingly trained themselves through repetition and behavioral coaching to sit comfortably in that exact zone of ambiguity and tension.
They just live in it.
They understand a core truth. Without tension, there is no behavioral change. And without behavioral change, there is no complex sale.
So let's translate this into a highly practical, immediate takeaway for you listening right now. I want you to literally open your calendar for the upcoming week. Look closely at your scheduled meetings.
Yeah, look at what's coming up.
Identify one specific conversation, one upcoming pitch or internal negotiation where you secretly know you are planning to prioritize harmony over effectiveness.
Oh, we all have one.
Where are you planning to just smile and agree with a suboptimal plan simply to keep the peace? Your homework is to practice holding your ground in that specific meeting.
Just try it.
Practice introducing just a small amount of constructive tension. Tell them what they are missing. It will feel uncomfortable, but that discomfort is the signal that you are actually adding value.
However, this raises an incredibly important, almost existential question about the SEC's findings.
Okay, what's that?
We noted at the very beginning of this deep dive that this entire study was born in the smoldering ashes of the 2009 economic crash.
Right.
So a highly skeptical listener, perhaps a sales VP who has built their entire career on relationship selling, might logically ask, is the challenger just a temporary situational phenomenon?
Oh. Are they essentially just the ultimate down economy representative?
Right. Did they succeed solely because corporate buyers were uniquely terrified and desperate for direction during a recession?
That's a fascinating point.
And if so, once the economy recovers and budgets open back up, won't the friendly, accommodating relationship builder naturally bounce back to the top of the leaderboard?
That is a fantastic, highly critical question. Because if the challenger is just an artifact of the 2009 recession, then maybe we don't need to fundamentally rewrite our entire corporate training manuals today. Maybe we just wait it out.
Exactly.
How did the researchers address that skepticism?
The researchers absolutely anticipated that exact question. So they went back and re-examined the massive data set of over 6,000 reps. But this time, instead of looking at the macroeconomic environment, they segmented the performance data through a completely different lens.
What lens?
The lens of complexity.
Complexity.
And when they did that, the story didn't just hold up, it became significantly more dramatic.
Okay, we need to carefully define our terms here. What exactly do the sources mean when they separate sales by complexity?
They split the entire universe of sales environments into two distinct categories. First, you have low-complexity sales.
Okay.
These are your basic, highly transactional, standalone product sales. The sales cycle is very short, usually involving only one single decision maker, and the product is largely a commodity that doesn't require the client to change their daily operations.
Okay. And the second category?
Second, you have high-complexity sales. These are the large, bundled, enterprise-level solution sales. They involve massive software integrations, sweeping consulting projects, or complex outsourcing agreements.
Oh, I see.
They involve long sales cycles, incredibly high price tags, and multiple competing stakeholders across different departments.
To put it in the simplest terms, low complexity is selling pallets of standard printer paper to an office manager.
Perfect example.
High complexity is selling a $5 million cloud-based ERP software system that will completely replace a company's legacy HR, finance, and supply chain infrastructure.
Precisely. Now here's where the data reveals its final shock. In the low-complexity transactional sales environment, selling the printer paper, the challenger still performs quite well, but they actually do not win the #1 spot. In a low-complexity environment, the hard worker wins.
Wait, really? The hard worker actually tops the chart in low complexity?
Yes, and structurally, it makes perfect sense. If you are selling a pure commodity like printer paper where your product is functionally identical to your competitor's product, success is fundamentally a numbers game.
Oh, because there's nothing to teach.
Exactly. You cannot teach an office manager a disruptive new insight about standard white paper. It's just paper.
Right.
The margin is made on volume. So if success is based entirely on how many procurement offices you can dial in a single afternoon, the person who makes 80 calls will mathematically beat the person who makes 40 calls.
The hard worker thrives absolutely when the complexity is low and the variables are fixed.
Yes.
But here is the massive catch for the modern business landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Almost every single B2B company in the world today is desperately trying to escape the commodity trap.
Nobody wants to be selling printer paper.
Nobody wants to sell printer paper based on razor-thin margins and pure price competition. Every CEO, every tech founder, every agency owner is trying to move upmarket to sell complex solutions.
They want to be seen as strategic consultants, not easily replaceable vendors.
So what happens to the performance distribution when we look exclusively at those high-complexity solution-based sales?
In high-complexity solution sales, the challenger's dominance absolutely skyrockets.
How high?
They go from making up nearly 40% of top performers across the board to comprising over 50% of all top performers in complex environments.
Wow.
More than half of every elite performer in a complex multi-stakeholder sale is utilizing the challenger methodology.
That is essentially a complete monopoly on high performance.
It really is.
And what happens to our friendly, harmony-seeking relationship builder when they try to sell a $5 million software integration?
They fall to near zero.
Zero.
They practically fall off the statistical map entirely. The data essentially suggests that it is mathematically nearly impossible to be a top performer in a highly complex sales environment if your primary behavioral driver is relationship building.
Wow. We have to dive deep into the psychology of why. Why is the relationship builder not just ineffective, but uniquely, fundamentally toxic to the execution of a complex deal?
Because the very nature of solution selling is inherently, unavoidably disruptive.
Disruptive.
Yeah. When you pitch a highly complex solution, you aren't just asking a customer to buy a tangible product and put it on a shelf in the supply closet. You're asking them to fundamentally, painfully change how their entire corporate organism behaves.
Right.
You are asking a chief operating officer to abandon their comfortable status quo, adopt a frightening new software system, force hundreds of their employees to go through agonizing retraining, and take a massive, highly visible professional risk that could literally get them fired if the implementation fails.
And a relationship builder who is biologically terrified of creating tension or conflict cannot possibly generate the necessary friction to push a human being to take that kind of terrifying leap.
Exactly. They just don't have the tools for it.
Think about the psychology of the buyer in that boardroom. Customers are paralyzed by risk. There is this massive, heavy force called indecision inertia.
Indecision inertia, yes.
It is always, always safer for a corporate buyer to just do nothing, to defer the decision to Q3, to stick with the devil they know.
Because doing nothing won't get them fired today.
Exactly. If you are just a friendly, endlessly accommodating relationship builder, You have no tools to overcome that immense inertia. You are just sitting across the table, nodding along empathetically as the executive says, yeah, this seems like a great product, but it's just too risky to overhaul our systems right now. Let's touch base next year.
And the relationship builder just says, okay, sounds great. Let's grab lunch next year.
Yes. You need a challenger to look them directly in the eye, introduce the constructive tension we talked about, and forcefully say, I understand the fear of transition, but based on the data we've reviewed, your current status quo is actively bleeding $2 million a quarter.
Boom.
The risk of remaining stagnant is now mathematically far greater than the risk of changing.
Precisely. The ultimate lesson here is that you must ruthlessly align your behavioral approach to the complexity of your environment. If you are selling a massive disruptive idea, whether that is a literal software platform to a Fortune 500 CEO, or a radical, boat-rocking new marketing campaign to your own internal executive team, being the hardest worker in the room isn't enough.
Right.
Being the nicest, most well-liked person in the office is absolutely not enough. You must actively challenge the recipient's deeply held worldview. You have to break their mental models before you can rebuild them around your solution.
It's demolition before construction.
Exactly. The data proves unequivocally that the challenger profile isn't just an artifact of the 2009 recession. They are the undisputed, structural heavyweight champion of the modern, highly complex business environment.
This entire deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening, and I think it fundamentally rewires how we should think about professional interaction.
It really does turn everything upside down.
We started with a hook that seemed almost heretical. The idea that being accommodating, avoiding conflict, and focusing entirely on warm relationships might actually be the specific mechanism causing you to fail in your career.
But the SEC data does not lie.
It doesn't. The absolute soul of this chapter, the core synthesis of everything we've discussed, is the realization that the single most valuable asset you can bring to a prospective client, to your employer, or to a strategic partnership is not your eager, smiling acquiescence.
No, it's not.
It is your unique, highly disruptive insight. Elite, top-tier performance in an increasingly complex world requires the immense professional courage to respectfully teach your clients what they are missing.
Intricately tailor your message to the selfish economics of every stakeholder.
And to confidently take control of the process, leveraging constructive tension as a tool for growth rather than running away from it in the name of artificial harmony.
Beautifully said. And now that we definitively know the challenger is the undisputed champion of complex sales, the ultimate organizational question becomes one of replication.
Oh, how do we build one?
Exactly. Because as we discussed at the very beginning, these are coachable behaviors, not fixed genetic traits.
So it can be taught.
Yes. So in our next deep dive, we have to explore the mechanical application of this theory. Can we take this seemingly natural, debater-like talent, bottle its specific frameworks, and systematically export it to the rest of the average team?
That's the million-dollar question.
How do you re-engineer a traditional, relationship-focused organization to guarantee that your entire workforce doesn't just challenge customers intellectually, but actually wins their lucrative business without instantly giving away all your margin to the competition?
That is going to be a profoundly fascinating conversation on organizational design. But until we get there, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, highly practical thought to chew on as you go about your week.
Yeah, leave them with something good.
Look closely at your own calendar for tomorrow. Look at the specific meetings, the pitches, and the internal reviews you have scheduled. Are you preparing to walk into those rooms with a passive mindset, hoping to simply learn and react to whatever they throw at you?
Are you just trying to keep everyone happy?
Exactly. Are you going in desperately hoping to just keep the peace, validate their current thinking, and be liked by everyone at the table? Or are you walking in deeply prepared to lead and simplify the complexity of their world?
It's a choice you have to make every day.
Think about how much more you could actually achieve, the unprecedented deals you could close, and the massive organizational impact you could truly make if you finally stopped trying to be everyone's favorite friend and started having the courage to be their most uniquely valuable teacher.
What if, and just hear me out on this, what if the absolute greatest lie you have ever been told in business is that you need to ask your customer what's keeping them up at night?
Yeah, that is definitely the sacred cow of sales right there.
Right. I mean, what if instead of discovering their needs, the actual secret to massive commercial success is telling them what they need before they even realize it themselves.
It sounds so counterintuitive when you first hear it because, I mean, for decades, the whole operating system in corporate sales has positioned the rep as this sort of elite diagnostician.
Like a doctor trying to find the pain.
Exactly. The accepted method was always, walk into a room, ask a series of these carefully calibrated, open-ended questions, and just extract the pain points the customer was already obsessing over.
Right, and then you just magically present your product as the cure.
Yeah, exactly. But the data set we're looking at today fundamentally dismantles that entire approach. I mean, completely tears it down.
Which is wild because that is what everyone is taught.
Oh, 100%. But the modern commercial environment has shifted so radically that acting as a diagnostician who's just searching for a known illness, well, it's a guaranteed path to commoditization now.
Because if they already know the illness, they're probably already shopping for the cure.
Exactly. The most successful organizations today, they aren't acting like diagnosticians anymore. They're acting as visionaries. They're pointing out a completely different asymptomatic disease that the customer is entirely blind to.
That is exactly what this deep dive is dedicated to unpacking today. We're taking the elite challenger sales model and really exploring the mechanics of, how you export that to the rest of a commercial team.
Yeah, taking it from the natural top performers and giving it to the core.
Right. So we're going to analyze why teaching a customer systematically beats discovering their needs. We'll get into the actual psychological choreography of a perfect commercial pitch, and we'll talk about why this shift is pretty much the only viable survival strategy for anyone trying to break through the noise today.
Because the landscape is just so incredibly saturated. I mean, this transition we're analyzing, it represents a massive structural shift in how value is actually created in business.
How do you mean? Like where the value actually lives?
Yeah, exactly. Because historically, we operated in this paradigm where the product was the center of the universe. The product was the value.
And the salesperson was just like the delivery guy.
Right, just a high bandwidth delivery mechanism for communicating features and benefits. But the data we're dissecting shows we've entered this new reality where the interaction itself, the actual conversation between the buyer and the seller, that has to generate the primary value.
So the conversation is the product, basically.
Essentially, yes. If the cognitive friction of that conversation isn't inherently valuable to the buyer, they're never even going to look at your underlying product.
Wow. Okay, so before we talk about scaling this across a whole company, we need to define the architecture of this challenger profile.
We have to know what we're actually building, yeah.
All right, and the source material isolates this methodology into a matrix of 3 core pillars. So that's teaching for differentiation, tailoring for resonance, and taking control of the sale.
Those are the big 3.
And the binding agent here, the thing holding it all together, is this concept of constructive tension, which, I mean, it almost sounds like an oxymoron, right?
It really does.
Yeah.
Especially in a business setting.
Yeah, because tension is usually the exact thing a rep is actively trying to de-escalate. We're always taught that friction kills deals.
And that aversion to tension is just deeply, deeply ingrained in corporate culture. It's why the challenger approach is so disruptive. But you have to understand, tension is a necessary byproduct of cognitive change. You can't change how someone thinks without a little friction.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So how do these 3 pillars actually interact? Because I think of it kind of like a 3-legged stool, If you're missing one, the whole thing just falls over.
That's a good way to look at it. Or let's look at it like the chemical formulation of structural concrete. You need 3 distinct elements to make it work, right? You need the cement, the aggregate, and the water.
Okay, I like this. Break that down for me.
So the teaching pillar, that's the cement. It's the core insight that binds the whole structure together. It's that moment you present an idea that fundamentally reframes how the customer views their own market.
Right, the aha moment.
Exactly. Then you have the tailoring pillar. That's the aggregate, the crushed stone and gravel. It provides the specific context, the industry jargon, the localized economic metrics. It gives the insight its mass and makes it relevant to the specific person in the room.
Because without that, it's just a general theory.
Exactly. And finally, taking control is the water. It activates the mixture and actually allows it to be poured and shaped into something useful.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy.
Yeah.
Because if the ratios in that formulation are off, the structure is just going to crumble under pressure.
It absolutely will.
So let's say you have the cement. You teach them this brilliant macroeconomic insight, but you completely lack the aggregate of tailoring. You're basically just delivering a theoretical lecture on, like, global supply chain logistics to a regional marketing director.
Right, and their only metric is local brand awareness.
Exactly. The structure has no localized weight. It's totally irrelevant.
Irrelevant and totally dismissible. And the reverse is true, too. If you load up on the aggregate, you perfectly tailor your message, you mirror their exact jargon, you've memorized their quarterly org chart.
You've done all your homework.
Right, but you fail to include the cement of a novel teaching insight. You just become this highly customized echo chamber.
Oh, man. An echo chamber. That's so true. You're just sitting across from the executive, perfectly articulating their existing pain, but you aren't offering any unexpected structural solution.
You're just commiserating with them in their specific dialect.
Yeah.
And look, commiseration does not generate budget approval in a risk-averse buying committee.
No one is cutting $1 million check just because you feel their pain.
Exactly. And then we add the water, taking control. Because if you assert control over the timeline, demanding next steps, pushing past objections, but you haven't provided the cement of a valuable insight to justify that assertiveness.
You just wash the whole foundation away.
Right. You aren't guiding them at that point. You're just being aggressive. You're demanding compliance without having earned the actual intellectual authority to do so.
Which is the fastest way to get kicked out of an office. The source material visualizes all of this as a Venn diagram, and it's that center overlap where this constructive tension lives.
That's the sweet spot.
Because when a rep delivers an insight that forces a customer to realize, oh, wow, my current operating model is fundamentally flawed, tension is instantly introduced in the room.
Of course it is. Nobody enjoys the cognitive dissonance of realizing they've been losing money or taking on massive risk without even knowing it. That's the teaching tension.
Right. And then when that disruptive insight is communicated in the exact context of their daily reality, which is the tailoring piece, it heightens the tension even more. Because now they can't intellectually escape it.
Exactly. They can't just wave their hands and dismiss it as some generalized industry problem. You've localized it directly to their P&L.
And then taking control is the mechanism for channeling that tension toward an actual decision, rather than just letting the discomfort completely paralyze the deal.
Right. But we really need to unpack that taking control piece because...
Okay, let's unpack this, actually, because I want to push back on this concept of taking control. The optics of that phrase are really problematic for modern corporate culture.
Yeah, no, it sounds terrible.
It does. When executives hear take control of the sale, the immediate visual in their head is like that aggressive table-pounding closer from a 1980s movie, high-pressure tactics, never letting the customer speak. How is this not just a polite academic rebrand of being a corporate bully?
It's a really fair question. But if you actually analyze the transcripts of these interactions, the tone is entirely different. Control, in this challenger context, is not about aggression. It's about maintaining structural momentum and holding firm on value.
Okay, give me an example of what that looks like in the real world.
Sure, and the data shows this happens throughout the entire life cycle of the engagement, not just at the final negotiation table. So let's look at a microscopic example. Say a customer attempts to derail a discovery meeting in the first 10 minutes. They just fold their arms and say, hey, let's just skip to the pricing sheet so we can see if we're even in the same ballpark.
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Or later in the cycle, they hit you with the ultimate enemy of the complex sale, the indefinite delay.
Yes. We love this, but things are chaotic right now. Let's circle back in Q3.
The indefinite delay. It's just the polite kiss of death.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now, a rep operating under the traditional relationship builder profile, someone whose whole goal is to reduce friction and please the customer, they are going to immediately fold in both of those scenarios.
They'll just hand over the naked pricing sheet without establishing any value first.
Exactly. Or they'll cheerfully agree to call back in Q3, effectively losing all of the momentum they built. But a challenger responds to that friction by establishing boundaries.
Okay, so how does a challenger answer the early pricing question?
They might say something like, I am absolutely going to walk you through our pricing model today, but until we agree on the specific scope of the operational leak we're trying to fix, the number won't really have any context. So let's look at the baseline data first.
Oh, wow. That's firm.
It is firm. And when faced with that Q3 delay, they anchor right back to the teaching insight. They'll say, we can absolutely pause until Q3, but let's just calculate the cost of inaction based on the model we just built. Every 30 days you delay is costing your division $50,000 in uncaptured efficiency. Are you comfortable absorbing $150,000 in losses just to delay the implementation?
Damn. That is control. I
Mm.
mean, it's authoritative, it's deeply uncomfortable, but it is completely tethered to the customer's actual economic reality.
Right. It's not bullying. It's acting as an authoritative guide through a process the customer is usually inherently terrified of.
Because modern procurement is so complex,
Right.
the customer is usually just paralyzed by the fear of making some massive capital mistake.
Exactly. Taking control is about possessing the intellectual confidence to push back. And it's not pushing back just for the sake of commission. It's because the rep genuinely believes that allowing the customer to delay is a dereliction of duty.
They believe in the insight so much they have to save the customer from themselves.
Precisely. And that confidence to push back is entirely derived from the quality of the insight brought to the table, which, forces a critical self-audit for any commercial organization listening to this.
Yeah, if your team is struggling, you have to figure out which leg of the stool is broken.
For your reps delivering brilliant, tailored insights, but then routinely caving the second procurement demands a 20% discount.
Or are they exerting tremendous control over the timeline, being super pushy but failing to teach anything novel, so they just come across as demanding vendors?
Right. Isolating that structural failure is the absolute prerequisite to fixing the performance.
But this analysis immediately surfaces a massive existential question for sales leadership. If this specific matrix, this ability to educate a seasoned executive, tailor the data flawlessly, and comfortably leverage interpersonal tension without detonating the relationship if that's so potent, is it purely genetic?
The nature versus nurture debate.
Exactly. Are we just looking at a psychological anomaly here? Because if the challenger is simply a natural-born unicorn, then the only management strategy is to just wander the earth hoping to hire them. And that is not a scalable business model.
It's really not. And this is addressed directly in the research because that assumption of the natural salesperson is so deeply pervasive in business. But the empirical data refutes the genetic lottery theory entirely.
Really?
Entirely. The researchers isolated that virtually every single rep across the global study exhibited latent traces of the challenger profile. We are not analyzing some innate, immutable personality type here. We aren't measuring Myers-Briggs indicators or extroversion.
The distinction between personality and behavior is just so crucial here. Because we aren't testing for elusive, nebulous traits like charisma, right? Charisma is unteachable.
Right. If a manager pulls a mid-tier rep into a one-on-one and demands, hey, I need you to be 20% more charismatic by the end of the quarter.
That rep is going to have a nervous breakdown, not a sales increase.
Exactly. It's absurd. The study focused entirely on observable, measurable behaviors. Business acumen, the depth of their pre-meeting financial preparation, the structural cadence of how they present, their ability to mathematically map a localized problem to a macro industry trend.
And because those are observable behaviors, they can be broken down into competencies, they can be drilled in a classroom, and aggressively coached by frontline managers.
Exactly. The challenger is built, not born.
Okay, I love this, but let's test the limits of that theory. Consider a rep whose psychological baseline is the quintessential relationship builder.
Okay, the classic people pleaser.
Right. This is someone who is highly empathetic, naturally seeks consensus, deeply desires to be liked, and has a visceral, biological aversion to interpersonal conflict.
We all know that rep. They're great to have a beer with.
Exactly. So how on earth does a manager train that specific psychological profile to actively introduce constructive tension into a boardroom full of skeptical executives without that rep experiencing a full-blown panic attack?
It's a great question.
Because if you force a conflict-averse person to challenge a CEO's worldview, their voice is going to shake, their body language will betray them, and it'll just come across as this highly artificial theatrical performance that completely destroys trust.
What's fascinating here is that the objective of the transformation is not to alter the psychological bedrock of the rep. You are not trying to force highly empathetic individuals to adopt a persona of artificial aggression. That never works.
So what's the mechanism for change then?
The mechanism lies in understanding the root cause of that fear of conflict. For a relationship builder, the aversion to tension in a sales environment typically stems from intellectual vulnerability.
Intellectual vulnerability. Explain that.
Okay, if an organization sends an empathetic rep into a high-stakes negotiation, and they are armed with nothing but a glossy product brochure, a feature list, and a pricing matrix, that rep is intellectually defenseless.
They have no ammunition.
None. So their only survival mechanism in that room is to rely on their charm, their agreeability, and their willingness to concede terms just to maintain the relationship.
Wow. Their agreeability basically becomes their primary currency because the organization hasn't provided them with anything of actual value to trade.
Precisely. Now alter the variables. Imagine the organization equips that exact same empathetic rep with a rigorous, heavily data-backed insight. An insight that proves, unequivocally, that the customer's current operational strategy is hemorrhaging capital in an area they haven't even monitored.
Okay, so now they have real ammunition.
Right. Suddenly, the rep's entire posture changes. They are no longer relying on their personality to validate their presence in the room. They are anchored to an objective, undeniable economic truth.
So it takes the pressure off of them as a person.
Exactly. The research demonstrates this fascinating cognitive mechanism. Absolute confidence in superior value naturally suppresses the biological fear of tension. When a rep knows their insight is empirically correct and urgently necessary, the tension shifts. It goes from being a personal confrontation to a professional intervention.
Oh, a professional intervention.
Yeah.
The psychological parallel there makes me think of a physician delivering a difficult diagnosis.
Yes, perfect analogy.
It's like a doctor might be a deeply empathetic, totally conflict-averse individual in their personal life. They do not enjoy telling a patient that their lifestyle is destroying their cardiovascular system.
No one enjoys that conversation.
Right. But they don't shy away from the intense friction of it. Why? Because they have the MRI data, they possess the medical expertise, and they have this moral certainty that creating temporary severe tension is literally the only mechanism to save the patient's life.
Yes. The doctor's authority doesn't come from an aggressive personality. It comes from diagnostic certainty.
Diagnostic certain. I love that phrase. That is exactly what has to be manufactured in a commercial context.
And that's the real directive for executive leadership here. You have to stop attempting to hire your way out of a revenue deficit by hunting for mythical top-tier talent. The talent pool of natural challengers is mathematically insufficient to sustain global corporate growth.
There just aren't enough of them out there.
There aren't. The strategy has to shift to investing heavily in the infrastructure required to activate the latent challenger behaviors within the middle 60% of your existing sales force. Your core performers have immense locked potential, but only if the organization provides them with the proper diagnostic tools.
But building those diagnostic tools exposes this massive operational vulnerability, which brings us to the whole concept of the organizational burden.
This is where most companies fail, honestly.
Right, because if the rep requires this rigorous, data-backed insight to suppress their fear of tension, where does that insight actually originate? You can't just look at an individual sales rep who, let's be honest, is currently consumed with managing CRM pipelines, negotiating legal contracts, putting out implementation fires, and traveling all over the place, and demand that they simultaneously act as this elite, investigative, macroeconomic researcher in their spare time.
No, you absolutely cannot. That assumption that individual reps can generate paradigm-shifting business insights between client calls is the primary point of failure for companies attempting this model. Exporting the challenger methodology is fundamentally about building a centralized organizational capability.
It's like a strict division of labor. I think of it like large-scale film production.
Oh, how so?
Well, you don't hire a critically acclaimed actor, place them on an empty soundstage, and instruct them to write a brilliant screenplay, design the lighting rig, construct the sets, and direct themselves.
Right, that would be a disaster.
Exactly. The actor is the ultimate delivery mechanism for the emotional impact. But the studio, the organization, they have to write the script and build the environment. So in the commercial realm, the organization, specifically the marketing and strategy divisions, they have to write the script.
Yes, they are entirely responsible for producing the scalable, repeatable commercial teaching pitch.
So what happens when organizations fail to internalize this burden and just delegate insight creation to the field reps?
You encounter two immediate, highly destructive dysfunctions. First, your highly ambitious, highly creative reps will begin fabricating insights on the fly just to generate tension.
Oh no, like making promises they can't keep.
Exactly. They will walk into a meeting and promise a customer a bespoke, highly complex solution to a localized business problem that your company's supply chain is physically incapable of delivering. Just because it sounded provocative in the room, they end up dragging the entire organization out of its core competency.
That's a nightmare for operations. And what's the second dysfunction?
The second is that the average reps who lack the time and analytical bandwidth to conduct deep research, they'll resort to just regurgitating generic macro trends. They'll walk in and tell a CIO, hey, cloud computing is really changing the landscape.
A fact the CIO probably read in an airline magazine 3 years ago.
Right. It generates zero tension and instantly positions the rep as a complete amateur.
Which neutralizes the entire concept of teaching. If the insight isn't novel, it's not teaching. It's literally just a recap of the morning news. Now, the tailoring aspect, that seems to demand a more symbiotic relationship between the org and the rep.
Yes, tailoring is a shared execution. The organization has to build the intelligence infrastructure. So the industry data sets, the role-based buyer personas, the ROI calculators.
They provide the tools.
They provide the tools, but the rep in the field must dynamically apply that architecture. The rep has to be able to read the room and realize, okay, the chief financial officer just stepped out. I am now presenting solely to the head of manufacturing. I need to pivot away from the capital depreciation insight and move right into the supply chain bottleneck insight.
So the application is tactical in the moment, but the generation of that core insight, that foundational aha moment, that is a strict organizational mandate.
100%.
But man, this mandate forces a radical, almost traumatic restructuring of traditional marketing departments. Because historically, B2B marketing has basically functioned as a PR and collateral factory.
Sad but true.
Right. They produce glossy product brochures, feature matrices, and those self-congratulatory white papers detailing the company's legacy. If the organization must now shoulder the burden of insight creation, marketing has to transform into an investigative intelligence unit. They have to produce what the source material calls customer-worthy insights. How does a traditional marketing team actually execute that workflow?
It requires an entirely different analytical muscle. I mean, marketing teams must stop auditing their own products and begin forensically auditing their customers' operating models instead.
That's a huge pivot.
Massive. They have to interview subject matter experts, analyze market failures, and actually hunt for the hidden costs the customer is incurring without realizing it. They are looking for the unseen variables.
And once they find them,
well, that's the hardest part of the workflow, the synthesis. They must take that newly discovered, unacknowledged customer problem and map it flawlessly back to their own company's unique, differentiated capabilities.
because if they find a massive problem that their product cannot uniquely solve, the insight is basically useless.
Exactly. You just educated the customer on a problem, and now they're going to go hire your competitor to fix it. It is a highly rigorous, intensely analytical process that, frankly, most marketing departments currently are not staffed or trained to execute.
Which naturally introduces the timeline problem. Because if marketing has to be restructured into an investigative unit and sales has to be trained to deliver these tension-inducing insights, we're talking about tearing up the floorboards of the entire commercial operation.
Yeah, you're gutting the house.
This brings us to the transformation journey. Early adopters of this methodology describe it not as a software patch, but as the installation of a completely new operating system for the enterprise.
That terminology is completely accurate because the change impacts every single node of the commercial network. It dictates how marketing researches, how HR profiles new hires, how frontline managers conduct pipeline reviews, and how the reps actually sequence their presentations.
So what's the timeline on something like this?
The source material is remarkably sober about this. This is a multi-year commercial transformation, years, not months.
Okay, but let's address the reality of modern corporate governance. Executive leadership operates on 90-day quarterly earnings cycles. Patience for multi-year systemic change is virtually non-existent in most public companies.
It's the biggest hurdle, without a doubt.
So what happens when a chief revenue officer reads an executive summary of the Challenger model on a flight, decides they want that sweet revenue bump by Q4, and attempts to mandate the transformation via a weekend training seminar and an enthusiastic company-wide email?
Disaster. The research indicates that rushing the implementation guarantees organizational organ rejection. The outcomes are highly, highly predictable.
Walk me through that crash and burn.
Okay, so initially you might observe a superficial, localized spike in confidence. A few reps might try out the new vocabulary on Monday morning. But because marketing hasn't actually built the data-backed insights yet, the reps will walk into meetings attempting to challenge executives with weak, generic data.
Oh, that's painful to even think about.
It is. They will be intellectually dismantled by the customer. Their confidence will immediately evaporate, and they will instantly revert back to relationship building just to salvage the account.
And the reps will blame the training.
Exactly. Furthermore, the sales force will accurately identify the initiative as just another disconnected corporate edict, the flavor of the month. They'll quietly endure the weekend training, check the compliance box, and ignore the methodology entirely.
And the collateral damage there is that the terminology itself becomes toxic. Once a methodology fails visibly within an organization, you cannot easily reintroduce it 3 years later. The cultural antibodies have already been developed.
Oh, we tried Challenger back in 24. It doesn't work for our industry. You hear it all the time.
Exactly. The mandate for leadership is to embrace a true, long-term change management protocol. You have to build the insight engine in marketing first. Then you train the frontline managers how to coach the behaviors. And only then do you roll it out to the field reps. It is an exercise in structural patience.
And that structural patience is required because the ultimate output of this transformation, that new script that marketing writes and sales delivers it, requires dismantling the absolute most sacred cow in the history of sales methodology.
Which brings us to the architecture of commercial teaching and the death of what's keeping you up at night.
RIP.
Seriously, because the era of solution selling completely dominated the 1990s and 2000s. The entire philosophy was built on the Socratic method of discovery. The rep was literally trained to sit down, ask highly calibrated, open-ended questions like, what are your key initiatives, or where are your operational bottlenecks?
Right. What's keeping you up at night?
Right. And then, once the customer articulated their pain, the rep would magically map their product features to that specific pain. It sounds incredibly logical. So why did a strategy that generated billions of dollars in revenue for 2 decades suddenly become obsolete?
It's simple. The world changed. Solution selling worked brilliantly in an era where products were highly differentiated and information was scarce. In the 1990s, the customer actually needed the rep to explain what was possible because the technology was opaque. You couldn't just Google it.
Right. The rep was the internet, basically.
Exactly. But the macro environment has flattened out. Technology has rapidly commoditized feature sets across almost every industry. If you ask a customer today what their primary problem is, they will articulate a highly generic, well-documented pain point. For example, we need to reduce supply chain latency by 12%.
Seems like a good thing to know, though.
It is, but here's the fatal flaw. The customer has already given that exact same requirement to your 3 biggest competitors. If you respond to their stated need with, "Great, we have a solution for that," you have instantly commoditized yourself. You are no longer a strategic advisor. You are just a vendor responding to a known spec. The buying committee will then force you and your 3 competitors into a spreadsheet, compare features line by line, and award the contract to the lowest bidder.
A race to the bottom. And the environment has also become highly defensive, right? We're witnessing the evolution of the consensus-based buying committee. Oh, the committee is everything now. You are no longer convincing a single autonomous executive who can just sign a check. You are pitching to a room containing a CIO, a CFO, a compliance officer, maybe an end user. And they all possess competing departmental agendas, and they all share a collective paralyzing fear of risk.
And don't forget the integration of third-party procurement consultants.
Oh, right. Those consultants whose sole compensation is based on extracting margin from vendors. If a rep walks into that hostile, highly structured environment and attempts to conduct a 45-minute needs discovery questionnaire, the committee will be infuriated.
They absolutely suffer from profound solutions fatigue. They view the rep's questions not as empathy, but as pure laziness. They expect the vendor to have analyzed their business model prior to the meeting.
You want us to do your job for you.
Exactly. The leverage in a discovery-led sale belongs entirely to the procurement committee. They hold all the cards. But the challenger methodology inverts this dynamic through commercial teaching.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Break down that core philosophy.
The foundational premise is that the customer does not fully understand their own business.
That is a bold claim.
It is, but it's true. They understand their symptoms, sure, but they have misdiagnosed the disease. The battle for customer loyalty is therefore won or lost entirely on the intellectual quality of the insight delivered during the sales conversation itself, completely independent of the actual product being sold.
The source material provides a highly granular case study that perfectly isolates this mechanism. Let's really analyze this commercial furniture supplier example.
It's one of the best examples in the book.
It really is. So, in a traditional scenario, a large corporation realizes they are expanding, and they require new office infrastructure. So they issue an RFP. A request for proposal detailing the exact specifications. We require 500 modular workstations, specific dimensions, specific fabric requirements. In the old solution selling model, vendors would receive the RFP, confirm the dimensions, and engage in a pricing war.
Right. The customer defined the problem as, we need desks, and the vendors accepted that definition without a single question.
But the challenger organization in this case study refused to accept the customer's diagnosis. They didn't lead with a pricing matrix. They conducted their own organizational analysis and discovered a macro trend affecting the customer's industry, a massive spike in employee turnover among highly skilled workers.
Which costs companies millions.
Exactly. So the challenger rep walked into the presentation and delivered a reframe. They presented data demonstrating that the customer's real problem was not a lack of physical desks. Their real problem was a crisis in employee collaboration and retention.
They completely shifted the entire cognitive frame of the meeting.
They utilized data to prove that traditional, isolated cubicle designs were actively crushing cross-departmental communication. It was isolating high-value talent and directly contributing to the churn rate. They took a localized procurement issue, literally just buying furniture, and escalated it to a C-suite existential crisis.
You are losing top talent to competitors with better spatial design.
Exactly. They taught the customer that their current RFP, if they executed it as written, would actually accelerate their retention problem. And by doing so, they completely disqualified all the competing vendors who were just blindly quoting prices for bad desks.
It's brilliant. The customer was forced to scrap the original RFP entirely and rewrite the specifications to prioritize collaborative architecture, specifications that magically precisely matched the challenger's proprietary product lines.
The psychological execution there is just flawless. They did not walk in and declare, "Our desks are constructed with 20% stronger steel." That is leading with your strengths, which triggers immediate skepticism. They led to their strengths.
That's the mantra, lead to O, not with.
They said, "Your current spatial architecture is costing you millions in human capital attrition, and here is the empirical data to prove it." They provided a unique, provocative perspective on the customer's own operational reality. They delivered value through the insight itself.
But, and this is a massive but, delivering that kind of disruptive insight is incredibly delicate.
Oh, it's a tightrope walk.
It really is, because if a rep executes this poorly, they don't sound like a visionary consultant. They sound like an arrogant amateur walking into someone else's corporation and insulting their intelligence.
Right. If you walk in and tell a CEO they're running their business wrong, you invite immediate ejection from the room.
Security will literally walk you out.
So the source material outlines a highly engineered 6-step choreography designed to safely introduce this tension so that it lands as an intellectual epiphany rather than a personal insult.
And the sequencing of these 6 steps is non-negotiable. It is an exercise in cognitive behavioral management. The overarching rule, as you just said, is to lead to your unique strengths, never with them.
Let's dissect the mechanism of each step, ping-ponging through the psychology of it. Step 1 is the warmer. And this is not the traditional rapport building of, asking about their weekend golf game or the weather.
No, small talk is dead here. The warmer is a calculated maneuver to build for hypotheses based on external data.
So what does that actually sound like?
The mechanism of the warmer is pattern recognition. The rep states, "In our analysis of your specific vertical over the last 3 quarters, we are consistently seeing companies struggle with trends X, Y, and Z. We hypothesize you are experiencing similar friction."
You are demonstrating that you've already done the homework.
Exactly. You are proving that you understand the macro forces acting upon their business without demanding that they spend 30 minutes educating you on the basics. You earn the right to their attention.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Okay, once that baseline credibility is established, the choreography demands an immediate pivot to step 2, the reframe. This is the fulcrum upon which the entire methodology rests. The reframe takes the known trend acknowledged in the warmer and exposes an unknown vulnerability within it.
The cognitive goal of the reframe is to induce a state of mild surprise. You are taking a problem the customer thought they understood perfectly and rotating it slightly to reveal a completely hidden dimension.
Going back to the furniture example, the reframe was taking the known problem of office expansion and rotating it to reveal the hidden dimension of employee attrition.
Exactly. And the verbal indicator that a reframe has been successful is when the executive leans back, pauses, and says, I never really thought about it that way before.
I never thought about it that way. That phrase confirms the introduction of constructive tension. You have successfully destabilized their operating assumptions. But you cannot leave an executive in a state of destabilization, right?
No, absolutely not. If you drop a provocative theory without immediate proof, they will reject it just to regain their cognitive balance. They'll say, well, that doesn't apply to us. This necessitates step 3, rational drowning.
Rational drowning, great name.
It is. It's the deployment of irrefutable data. It appeals entirely to the analytical left brain. You have just proposed that their current operating model is flawed. Now you must drown them in the mathematics of that flaw.
So this is where you bring out the market research, the hidden cost calculators, the projected loss models.
Right. You quantify the exact financial bleed caused by that unseen problem you introduced in the reframe. You prove, objectively, that maintaining their current status quo is economically unsustainable.
But human beings, even highly analytical CFOs, they do not make massive purchasing decisions based purely on rational spreadsheets. Data builds the logical foundation, sure, but it lacks velocity. To generate actual movement, we need step 4, emotional impact.
Emotional impact bridges the gap between macroeconomic theory and localized daily pain. It activates the right brain.
So you take the millions of dollars in abstract losses identified in the rational drowning phase, and you shrink them down to the scale of the individual sitting in the room.
Precisely. You map the structural failure to their specific daily operational headaches. You articulate how this hidden problem is stressing their direct reports, increasing their personal compliance risk, jeopardizing their quarterly bonuses, forcing them to work weekends.
You make it hurt. You ensure the problem is no longer just an intellectual curiosity on a graph. It is a visceral, personal threat to them.
By the conclusion of step 4, the buying committee should be highly uncomfortable. They clearly see the hidden problem, they understand the massive financial cost, and they feel the acute personal pain of it.
The tension is now at its absolute peak. They are metaphorically bleeding out on the boardroom table. Now, the instinct for an untrained rep at this exact moment is to reach into their bag, grab a product brochure, and shout, "We can save you."
Oh, they want to pitch so badly right there.
But the choreography demands restraint. Step 5 is a new way. And the nuance here is incredibly critical.
Step 5 requires immense discipline. You must introduce the solution, but you must not introduce your product.
Wait, what?
I know. You are introducing the behavioral changes required to stop the bleeding. You present the architecture of a theoretical cure. You say, to fix this structural leak, an organization would need a capability that can execute function A, automate function B, and scale function C.
You are actively defining the exact criteria of the perfect solution, independent of any brand.
Exactly. You must gain their intellectual consensus on this new way of operating before you ever mention your company. If they do not agree on the necessary capabilities, your product features are irrelevant.
I see. You are building a highly specific lock and getting them to agree on the exact shape of the keyhole. And finally, in step 6, your solution, you present the key.
Precisely. Only in the final phase of the choreography do you introduce your company, your capabilities, and your specific product line. And because you, or really the organization, have carefully engineered the criteria in step 5 to align exclusively with your own proprietary strengths, your product emerges not as a vendor pitch, but as the only logical, inevitable conclusion to the problem you just diagnosed.
To visualize the pacing of this, I always think of the narrative structure of a complex heist film, something like Ocean's 11.
Oh, that's a really good analogy.
Right. In that film, the director spends 80% of the runtime meticulously establishing the impossibility of the problem. They show you the vault, the armed guards, the laser grids, the biometric scanners. They make the audience intimately aware of the friction. Only in the final 20% of the film do they reveal the prestige, how the unique, highly specialized skills of the crew managed to bypass the system. Because if George Clooney sat down in the first 5 minutes of the movie and just explained the entire technical bypass before you understood the security system, it would be meaningless technical jargon. You'd be bored.
The parallel to sales is exact. When a rep walks into a room and immediately opens a presentation detailing their global footprint, their software architecture, and all their industry awards, it is meaningless technical jargon. Because the customer doesn't yet believe they have a problem that requires solving.
But it's terrifying for the rep, right? The terror reps feel when adopting this choreography is the fear of running out of time. They panic at the idea of spending the first 40 minutes of a 60-minute meeting not talking about the product they are compensated to sell.
It feels completely unnatural to them. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the mechanism dictates that if you lead with your product, the customer doesn't care. Your product only matters once they believe they have a problem they didn't know about. If you lead with features, you are a commodity. If you lead with insight, you are an indispensable partner.
This requires a brutal, practical audit of your current assets. Anyone listening to this analysis right now needs to immediately pull up their organization's standard introductory pitch deck.
The look in the mirror quiz.
Exactly. Analyze the first 5 slides. If those slides contain a timeline of your company's founding, a map of your global office locations, a list of your Fortune 500 clients, and a bulleted list of your core services, you are completely violating the fundamental rule of the choreography.
You are doing it backward.
You are leading with your strengths. You are demanding the customer care about your history before you have demonstrated any understanding of their future. You must invert the architecture. The first 80% of the presentation must be entirely dedicated to the customer's unseen vulnerabilities and the new behavioral model required to survive them.
It really demands an organizational suppression of ego. You must deliberately withhold talking about yourself to create the vacuum that the customer will eventually ask you to fill.
So, what does this all mean? Synthesizing this entire ecosystem, we have deconstructed the mythology of the natural born closer. We've reallocated the burden of insight generation entirely onto the shoulders of a restructured marketing department. And we have analyzed the intense psychological choreography required to dismantle a customer's worldview without destroying the relationship. The absolute core of this chapter is a fundamental redefinition of what a product actually is in the modern economy.
Yeah, the physical product or the software license is merely the trailing indicator of the value transfer.
The Challenger methodology proves that in a saturated, deeply risk-averse environment, the commercial conversation itself is the primary product. You are not selling modular desks or cloud architecture. You are selling a new, cognitive lens through which the executive can view their own market.
And if you possess the organizational capability to manufacture that lens and the frontline discipline to deliver it through constructive tension, you do not just win a single procurement cycle. You secure their intellectual loyalty.
You transition from being a vendor who just supplies the materials to the architect who designs the structure. You dictate the terms of the engagement.
It changes everything.
Now that you know how to build a world-class commercial teaching pitch, the next critical failure point is deployment. How do you make sure that this meticulously crafted insight doesn't disintegrate when you present it to a deeply divided, consensus-driven buying committee where the CMO, the CIO, and the head of procurement all have violently conflicting agendas? Next time, we will explore the precise art of tailoring for resonance and analyze why delivering a single, unified message to a complex buying committee is no longer enough.
But this raises an important question before we go. We have spent this deep dive dissecting the profound commercial power of challenging a customer's most deeply held operating assumptions. But the methodology is entirely dependent on objective analysis. So turn that analytical lens inward for a minute.
Oh, I like this.
If the most lucrative insights are generated by exposing the hidden flaws in a system, what foundational assumption about your own business model, your own product architecture, or your own go-to-market strategy are you currently too terrified to challenge?
Because if you are unwilling to induce that constructive tension internally and challenge your own status quo, the data guarantees that a competitor is currently building the pitch deck to do it for you. We will see you next time.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.